Her husband left her with 3 kids for a younger, wealthier woman, but what happened next would change her life forever. A chance haircut revealed her hidden talent, catching the eye of a millionaire who saw in her what no one else could. From abandoned wife to beauty empire founder, her story proves that sometimes your greatest power emerges when everything falls apart. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button to see more incredible stories. Jessica Parker's hands trembled as she stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, evidence of another sleepless night. The letter from Robert's lawyer sat crumpled on the edge of the sink, its clinical language, a stark contrast to the 13 years they had shared together. Dissolution of marriage, division of assets, custody arrangements. The words swam before her eyes. Outside the bathroom door, she could hear 3-year-old Ethan's laughter mingling with 5-year-old Emma's animated storytelling. In the portable crib nearby, 10-month-old Noah had just fallen asleep after fighting his morning nap with remarkable determination, a trait Jessica recognized all too well. It was Robert's stubborn chin on the baby's face, Robert's eyes looking back at her from Emma's curious gaze, Robert's mischievous smile that flashed across Ethan's face when he was plotting some new adventure. The same Robert who had packed his belongings 3 weeks ago, explaining with rehearsed precision that he'd found someone else and deserved to be happy. The someone else being Heather Williams, the 25-year-old daughter of the owner of the luxury car dealership where Robert had recently been promoted to general manager. The perfect corporate match, he'd called it, an opportunity he couldn't pass up. Jessica's fingers closed around the scissors she'd placed on the counter. Her long auburn hair, which Robert had always loved, cascaded past her shoulders, the way he preferred it. She gathered a thick strand between her fingers. "You can't do this alone," Robert had said when she'd confronted him about the affair. "You've never even had a real career. You've always just been a mum." The scissors made a satisfying snicking sound as they sliced through the first strand of hair. Auburn locks fell into the sink like autumn leaves. Snick, snick, snick. Each cut felt like a small act of rebellion, of reclamation. With each fallen strand, the weight on her shoulders seemed to lighten incrementally. "Mom?" Emma's voice called from the other side of the door. "Are you okay in there?" Jessica looked at her reflection, hair now jagged and falling just below her chin, her green eyes bright with unshed tears and something else. Something that looked surprisingly like determination. "I'm okay, sweetie," she called back, her voice steadier than she expected. "Mummy's just giving herself a new haircut." "Can I see?" Emma's excitement was palpable even through the door. Jessica took a deep breath, wiped away a stray tear and opened the bathroom door. Emma's eyes widened. "You look like a warrior princess," her daughter whispered with reverence. Jessica knelt down, inhaling Emma's familiar scent of apple shampoo and peanut butter. "Do you know what warrior princesses do, Em?" Emma shook her head, her eyes never leaving her mother's new haircut. "They face really hard things," Jessica said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "And even when they're afraid, they keep going. They figure out a way." Emma nodded solemnly, then reached up to touch her mother's shortened locks. "It's pretty, Mommy. You look strong." From the portable crib came the first whimpers of Noah awakening, and in the living room, something crashed, followed by Ethan's "uh-oh." Jessica closed her eyes briefly, steeling herself for whatever new disaster awaited. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to herself, not entirely believing it yet, but needing to say the words aloud. Somehow we're going to be okay. The ancient washing machine groaned and shuddered through its final spin cycle as Jessica folded the last batch of laundry that wasn't hers. 3 weeks had passed since the bathroom haircut incident, as she'd come to think of it, and while her hair had settled into a surprisingly stylish, choppy bob, her financial situation had only grown more precarious. Robert's first support check wouldn't arrive for another 2 weeks. The rent was due in 5 days, and Noah had just outgrown his last package of diapers. The elegant Victorian home belonging to Samantha Reeves represented Jessica's first foray into what she privately called survival mode, taking on laundry services for the wealthy widow who lived 4 doors down. The arrangement had begun accidentally, when Jessica had helped the older woman carry groceries home during a rainstorm, and Samantha had mentioned her frustration with the local dry cleaning service. "I'll do it," Jessica had blurted, surprising herself as much as Samantha. "I mean, I could wash and iron your things properly." Now she carefully placed the pressed linens and blouses into the wicker basket, wondering how many more clients she would need to make ends meet. The doorbell chimed, signaling Samantha's return from her weekly bridge game. "Jessica, darling, are you still here? Marvelous." Samantha's voice carried through the house like musical notes, elegant and precisely placed. The woman herself appeared in the doorway of the laundry room moments later, her silver hair arranged in its usual immaculate French twist. She stopped, abruptly, her eyes widening. "Good heavens, what have you done with your hair?" Jessica's hand flew self-consciously to her head. "I, decided I needed a change." Samantha circled her, eyes narrowed critically. "Turn," she commanded, twirling her finger. Jessica complied, feeling suddenly like she was being evaluated at a livestock auction. "It's magnificent," Samantha declared finally. "Absolutely inspired. Who did it?" "I did," Jessica admitted, with bathroom scissors and a lot of anger. Instead of the horror Jessica expected, Samantha burst into delighted laughter. "The best transformations often begin that way, my dear." She touched her own perfectly coiffed hair. "I've been going to Francois at La Belle Salon for 20 years, and he's never given me anything half so interesting. Would you—" She hesitated, then plunged ahead. "Would you consider cutting mine?" Jessica stared at her. "I'm not a hairdresser." "Clearly," Samantha agreed, "you're an artist. There's a distinction." Within the hour, Jessica found herself standing behind Samantha in the sun-drenched conservatory, fingers trembling slightly, as she combed through the older woman's fine silver hair. "I'm not sure this is a good idea," Jessica murmured. "Nonsense," Samantha replied firmly. "I've buried 2 husbands and survived disco. I can handle a haircut." She met Jessica's eyes in the hand mirror she held. "Besides, something tells me you need this as much as I do." "Need what?" "To create something new, to transform something." Samantha's voice softened. "I know about Robert leaving. This neighborhood runs on gossip the way cars run on gasoline." Jessica's hands stilled momentarily. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted. "With any of it. The kids, the bills, the future, this haircut." "Start with what's in front of you," Samantha advised, "one snip at a time." As Jessica began to cut, she found something unexpected happening. With each careful, deliberate movement, her focus narrowed to just this moment, just this task. The world outside this sunny room with its riot of houseplants and comfortable wicker furniture seemed to recede. There was only the satisfying whisper of the scissors, the emerging shape of Samantha's new style, and the growing pile of silver hair on the tiled floor. When she finally stepped back, both women stared at the reflection in the mirror. Samantha's conventional French twist had been replaced by an elegant shorter cut that somehow made her blue eyes more vivid, her cheekbones more pronounced. "Oh my," Samantha breathed, turning her head from side to side. "Oh my goodness," Jessica's heart sank. "You hate it." "Hate it? I look 10 years younger." Samantha stood up and grasped Jessica's hands. "My dear girl, I have my weekly lunch with the garden club tomorrow. There will be 6 women there, all of whom have more money than sense and a pathological fear of looking their age. I want you to bring your scissors." Jessica blinked. "What?" "I'm going to introduce you as my exciting new discovery from New York, who's only in town temporarily, consulting for an exclusive clientele." Samantha's eyes gleamed with mischief and something else, determination that matched the new feeling growing in Jessica's chest. "We'll start with a proper fee too. No more of this laundry business, though I'll still pay you for today's work, of course." "But I'm not a professional," Jessica protested weakly. Samantha waved this away as if swatting a particularly annoying fly. "Details. What you are, Jessica Parker, is a woman with 3 children to support and a clear gift. The question is not whether you can do this." She squeezed Jessica's hands. "The question is, are you brave enough to try? In the late afternoon light streaming through the conservatory windows, surrounded by the evidence of her unexpected talent, Jessica felt something new unfurling inside her chest. Not happiness, exactly. The wound of Robert's betrayal was still too fresh, the challenges ahead still too daunting. But something adjacent to hope, a tiny, fragile seedling of possibility. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with the firmness of her answer. "Yes, I'll do it." "Absolutely not." Jessica's voice echoed off the bathroom tiles as she glared at her reflection. The woman who stared back at her looked both familiar and foreign, the same green eyes and freckled nose she'd known all her life, but framed by a stylishly tousled bob instead of the long locks she'd worn since college. The invitation that had arrived from Samantha that morning lay open on the counter. Williams Luxury Automotive Annual Employee Appreciation Gala. Stylist services requested. Ms. Jessica Parker by special arrangement. Just below the elegant script, Samantha had scrawled, $2,000 for the evening. They specifically asked for you after Madeline showed off her new cut. Say yes. $2,000. Enough to cover next. Month's rent with money left over for groceries, and maybe even a small emergency fund. All for one evening's work. Jessica braced her hands against the cool porcelain of the sink. "You're not a real hairstylist," she told her reflection. "You're a desperate housewife with bathroom scissors and dumb luck." The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind. After the garden club luncheon, where she'd given subtle but transformative cuts to 4 of Samantha's friends, Jessica's phone had begun ringing. Women who normally traveled to New York or Los Angeles for their hair appointments were suddenly appearing in Samantha's conservatory, cash in hand, tentatively excited about this exclusive new talent. Jessica had established a makeshift salon in the sunroom, with Emma and Ethan playing quietly in the adjoining living room, while Noah napped in a portable crib Samantha had unearthed from her attic. Between appointments, Jessica devoured YouTube tutorials and checked out armfuls of books on hairstyling from the local library. Each night, after the children were asleep, she practiced on mannequin heads purchased from a beauty supply store, her fingers growing more confident with each passing day. But this, a corporate event at the very dealership where Robert now worked alongside his new fiancée, this felt like tempting fate. "Mom?" Emma's voice pulled Jessica from her spiral of doubt. Her daughter stood in the doorway, clutching the worn stuffed rabbit that had been her constant companion since Robert's departure. "Are you talking to yourself again?" Jessica managed to smile. "Just having a little debate." "About what?" "About whether I'm brave enough to do something scary." Emma considered this, her small face serious. "Is it really scary or just feels scary? Miss Abernathy says there's a difference." Jessica raised an eyebrow, momentarily distracted. "Who's Miss Abernathy?" "My school counselor. I see her on Tuesdays, when I'm feeling sad about Daddy." Emma said this matter-of-factly, though the way she clutched her rabbit tighter told a different story. "She says sometimes things just feel scary because we haven't done them before, but that doesn't mean they're actually dangerous." Jessica knelt down to her daughter's level. "When did you get so wise, Em?" Emma shrugged. "I don't know, but you always say we have to be brave now, like warrior princesses." She reached up to touch Jessica's short hair. "You were brave with your haircut, and now you make other people brave with their haircuts too." From the simplicity of her daughter's perspective, the decision suddenly seemed obvious. Jessica wasn't just cutting hair. She was helping women feel renewed, more confident, exactly what she herself had experienced in those first cathartic moments with the scissors. "You know what, Emma? You're absolutely right." Jessica kissed her daughter's forehead. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is just show up." 2 evenings later, Jessica found herself standing in the gleaming atrium of Williams Luxury Automotive, surrounded by the soft hum of conversation and the occasional tinkle of laughter. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the showroom floor, where the newest models gleamed like massive jewelry. In a cordoned-off section, Jessica had set up a simple styling station, all sleek lines and professional equipment she'd rented specifically for this event. So far, she'd styled the hair of 6 employees, each one leaving her chair with a new bounce in their step, and a card with her contact information. But with each snip of her scissors, Jessica's awareness of her surroundings had heightened. Robert was here somewhere, possibly with Heather on his arm. The thought made her stomach clench. You must be the miracle worker everyone's talking about. Jessica turned to find herself face to face with a tall, distinguished man in his late 30s. His tailored suit spoke of quiet wealth, but it was his eyes that caught her attention. Warm, brown with flecks of gold, and a depth of kindness that seemed at odds with his powerful presence. Miracle worker might be overselling it, Jessica replied, finding her voice. I just cut hair. From what I've observed this evening, what you do goes beyond cutting hair. He extended his hand. Michael Williams. Jessica's heart stuttered. Williams, as in Williams Luxury Automotive, as in very possibly Heather's father. Jessica Parker, she managed, accepting his handshake and hoping her palm wasn't noticeably damp. I know, he said with a smile. That transformed his serious face. Your reputation precedes you. In fact, there's someone I'd like you to meet if you have a moment. Before Jessica could formulate a response, Michael had gently taken her elbow, guiding her through the crowd toward a quieter corner of the showroom. Seated in an elegant chair, partially hidden behind a spectacular red convertible, was an elderly woman whose regal posture belied her advanced years. Grandmother, Michael said warmly, this is the stylist I mentioned. Jessica, meet Eleanor Williams, the true founder of our family business, though she'll never admit it. Eleanor's shrewd grey eyes assessed Jessica with undisguised curiosity. So you're the one who's been turning my social circle upside down with those revolutionary haircuts? Her voice was unexpectedly youthful, with a hint of amusement. Madeline hasn't stopped preening since you got hold of her. Jessica smiled despite her nervousness. Mrs. Whitmore was wonderful to work with. She's insufferable when she thinks she's more fashionable than everyone else, Eleanor countered, then patted the seat beside her. Sit. Tell me how you developed such skill without formal training. As Jessica hesitantly explained her unconventional entry into hairstyling, she became aware of a subtle change in Eleanor's demeanor. The older woman's breathing had quickened, her fingers now clutching the armrests with whitened knuckles. Mrs. Williams, Jessica interrupted herself. Are you all right? It's nothing, Eleanor dismissed, though her voice had thinned. Just one of my spells. The doctor calls them panic attacks. I call them an inconvenience. But Jessica recognized the signs all too well. Her own mother had suffered from similar episodes for years. Without thinking, she knelt before the older woman, taking her trembling hands. Focus on my voice, she said softly. Feel the ground beneath your feet. 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear. Guiding Eleanor through the grounding technique her mother had taught her, Jessica watched as the panic gradually ebbed from the older woman's face. When she was breathing normally again, Eleanor gave Jessica's hands a gentle squeeze. Well, she said with remarkable composure, that was unexpected. Where did you learn to do that? My mother had anxiety, Jessica explained. I grew up learning how to help her through it. Eleanor studied her with newfound interest. You have hidden depths, Jessica Parker. She turned to Michael, who had been watching the interaction with quiet concern. I like this one, Michael. Make sure we keep her around. As Eleanor was called away by another guest, Michael turned to Jessica with open admiration. I've never seen anyone handle my grandmother so effectively. Usually her episodes require medication and a quiet room. It was nothing, Jessica demurred, just something I learned growing up. It wasn't nothing to her or to me. Michael's gaze was steady, evaluating. Have you thought about what's next for you, Jessica, beyond styling hair in Samantha Reeves's conservatory? The question struck at the heart of the doubt Jessica had been harboring. What was next? How long could she sustain this precarious new existence? I'm taking it one day at a time, she answered honestly. Michael nodded thoughtfully. Well, when you're ready to think bigger, I'd like to talk to you about some ideas. I have my card. He slipped a heavy cream-colored business card into her hand. My personal number is on the back. As he walked away, Jessica stared at the embossed card in her hand. Behind her, she heard a familiar laugh, Robert's, followed by a woman's voice. She stiffened, but didn't turn around. Instead, she slipped Michael's card into her pocket and returned to her styling station. For the first time since Robert's betrayal, Jessica felt a strange sense of standing at a crossroads. Ahead of her stretched not just one uncertain path, but several, each fraught with risk, each glimmering with possibility. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she felt something unexpected. She felt ready. "Hold still, Noah. Mommy needs to fix your tie." Jessica knelt before her youngest, who squirmed with the boundless energy of a toddler forced into formal wear. Behind her, Emma twirled in her new blue dress, while Ethan systematically removed and replaced the cushions from Samantha's antique sofa. "Ethan, please stop disassembling Mrs. Reeves' furniture," Jessica called over her shoulder, securing Noah's clip-on tie with a sense of accomplishment that felt disproportionate to the task. Each small victory, a properly dressed child, a balanced checkbook, a new client booking, had taken on outsized importance in her new reality. "They look wonderful, Jessica." Samantha appeared in the doorway of her living room, elegant as, always in a tailored pantsuit, like something from a children's clothing advertisement. Eleanor, resplendent in emerald green, greeted Jessica with genuine affection. Emma and Ethan charmed the guests with their earnest questions and observations, while Noah contentedly allowed himself to be passed among a series of delighted elderly women who declared him the most perfect baby they'd ever encountered. As Jessica circulated through the party, she found herself engaged in conversations about her growing business, fielding inquiries about appointments, and even discussing the possibility of offering styling services for special events. "You see?" Michael appeared at her elbow, offering a glass of champagne. "They're enchanted by you." "They're being kind," Jessica demurred. "They're being strategic," Michael countered. "In this crowd, discovering a talented new stylist is social currency." His expression grew more serious. "Speaking of which, I've been meaning to discuss something with you. Do you have a moment?" He led her through French doors onto a terrace overlooking illuminated gardens. The spring evening was mild, fragranced with roses and the distant scent of water from an ornamental lake. "Jessica, I've been thinking about your situation," Michael began, leaning against the stone balustrade. "You've outgrown Samantha's conservatory." The truth of his words resonated through her. "I have," she admitted, "but commercial space in town is expensive, and I'd need equipment, proper licenses." "What if that weren't an obstacle?" Michael asked. "What if you had the capital to establish a proper salon, something that reflected your talent and vision?" Jessica studied him, sudden wariness threading through her. "Why would you help me?" Michael held her gaze. "Multiple reasons. I believe you have exceptional talent that deserves a proper platform. I've watched how hard you've worked these past months, balancing your children's needs with building your business. I admire that." He paused. "And selfishly, my grandmother hasn't had a panic attack since you taught her those breathing techniques. Her doctor is amazed at the difference." "Those are very kind reasons," Jessica acknowledged. "But in my experience, nothing comes without strings attached." Something flickered across Michael's face. Respect, perhaps, for her directness. "Fair enough. The arrangement I'm proposing would be a proper business investment, with clear terms. I provide the capital, you provide the expertise and labor. We split the profits accordingly, once you've repaid the initial investment." "Why not just offer a loan?" "Because I don't just want to lend you money, Jessica. I want to help you build something sustainable." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I've seen what you can do with limited resources and training. Imagine what you could accomplish with proper backing." The possibility expanded in Jessica's mind. A real salon with proper equipment, maybe even employees someday. A stable future for her children, financial independence that went beyond mere survival. "I'd need to think about it," she said finally. "Review the details." Michael nodded, retrieving an envelope from his jacket pocket. "All the particulars are in here. Take your time. Consult with anyone you trust." He handed her the envelope. "This isn't charity, Jessica. This is me recognizing potential and wanting to be part of its development." Before she could respond, a small voice called from the doorway. "Mom, Ethan's trying to climb the big tree." "Statue." Jessica closed her eyes briefly. "The topiary, of course he is," Michael chuckled. Shall we go rescue your son from a confrontation with my grandmother's prized landscaping? As they walked back into the party together, Jessica tucked the envelope into her purse, its weight both promising and terrifying. Later that night, after the children were asleep in their beds, she would open it and pore over the contents. A business plan more thorough than anything she could have created, financial projections that made her breathless, and terms so generous. They defied her understanding of investment logic, but for now she allowed herself to simply be present in this moment of possibility where the future stretched before her not as a looming threat, but as a canvas awaiting her design. "Hold still, Mrs. Abernathy. I'm almost finished." Jessica guided the scissors with precision around the older woman's ear, each snip deliberate and confident. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the large windows of Parker-style studio, casting everything in a golden glow that still felt surreal, even after 3 months of operation. The salon, her salon, occupied a prime corner location in the renovated historic district. Its interior was a careful balance of modern elegance and inviting warmth. Sleek styling stations with state-of-the-art equipment, comfortable seating, areas with plush velvet chairs, and strategic pops of color against a sophisticated neutral palette. "Thanks to you," Jessica replied, straightening up and smoothing her own dress. A simple black number she'd found on clearance, altered slightly to better fit her frame. "I still think this is too much." 6 months had passed since the Williams automotive event. 6 months of building a loyal clientele, of turning Samantha's conservatory into a legitimate salon space, of late nights studying technique and business principles. 6 months of slowly, incrementally finding her footing as a single mother and fledgling entrepreneur. And now this, a formal gathering at the Williams estate to celebrate Eleanor's 80th birthday. An invitation that had arrived unexpectedly, addressed not just to Jessica, but to Jessica Parker and family. "Nonsense," Samantha dismissed Jessica's concerns with a wave. "You saved Eleanor Williams from a public panic attack and have been styling her hair weekly ever since. Of course, you're invited to her birthday celebration." What Samantha didn't know, what Jessica had told no one, was that the invitation had been hand-delivered by Michael himself, who had begun dropping by the conservatory salon with increasing frequency. Sometimes for a trim, sometimes just to talk, sometimes under the pretense of accompanying his grandmother. Each visit left Jessica both buoyed and confused, uncertain what to make of this charming, thoughtful man who seemed inexplicably interested in her chaotic life. "Besides," Samantha continued, helping Emma adjust her headband, "this is a networking opportunity. Half the town's elite will be there. Think of the potential clients." Jessica nodded, though new clients were becoming less of a concern. Between her regular appointments and the weekly visits to Eleanor's home, where she often ended up styling the hair of Eleanor's friends as well, Jessica's schedule was nearly full. What kept her awake at night now was not the fear of financial ruin, but the knowledge that she had reached the limits of what she could accomplish in Samantha's conservatory. "Mom, can I bring Hoppy?" Emma asked, clutching her ever-present stuffed rabbit. "Not tonight, sweetheart. Hoppy should stay home where it's safe." Jessica checked her watch. "Our ride should be here any minute." As if summoned by her words, the doorbell chimed. Samantha's eyebrows rose as she glanced out the window. "That's not a taxi," she observed with a knowing smile. "Unless taxis now come in the form of luxury SUVs with chauffeurs." Jessica's stomach flipped as she looked out to see a sleek black vehicle in the driveway, a uniformed driver standing at attention beside it. Before she could process this development, Ethan had bolted for the door, throwing it open with characteristic enthusiasm. "Wow, is this our car?" he exclaimed to the startled driver. "For this evening, yes, young sir," the driver replied with admirable professionalism. Mr. Williams thought Miss Parker and her family might appreciate a comfortable ride to the estate. 20 minutes later, the SUV wound up the long driveway to the Williams mansion, a stately historic home set on several manicured acres outside town. As they approached, Jessica felt a familiar flutter of doubt. What was she doing here? In this rarefied world of old money and established names, with 3 children in tow and a career cobbled together from desperation and lucky breaks. "Look, Mum," Emma's voice broke through her thoughts. There's Mr. Michael! Sure enough, Michael stood waiting at the entrance, hands casually tucked into the pockets of his perfectly tailored suit. As the car came to a stop, his face broke into a warm smile that seemed directed solely at Jessica, despite the excitement of her children tumbling from the vehicle around her. "You came?" he said simply when she reached him. "We came," Jessica confirmed, suddenly shy. "Thank you for sending the car. It was very thoughtful. I hoped it might make the evening easier with the children." His gaze moved to where Emma, Ethan and Noah were already being entertained by an older man Jessica recognized as Michael's uncle. "They look wonderful." "They've been practicing their please and thank yous all week," Jessica admitted, "though I make no guarantees about Ethan's ability to refrain from climbing the furniture." Michael laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "I've child-proofed my grandmother's favorite antiques just in case." He offered his arm. "Shall we? The guest of honor has been asking when you'd arrive." As Michael led her into the grand foyer, where guests mingled beneath crystal chandeliers, Jessica caught a glimpse of their reflection in an ornate mirror. She barely recognized herself, not just because of the dress or the carefully styled hair, but because of the way she carried herself now. Head higher, shoulders back, a quiet confidence that hadn't existed 6 months ago. The evening unfolded like something from a dream. In the children's corner, Emma was helping Noah stack blocks while Ethan narrated an elaborate adventure for his action figures. Jessica had insisted on the children's area during the design phase, despite the raised eyebrows of the interior decorator. "My children are part of this journey," she'd explained firmly. "They need to be able to be here after school and know they belong." Michael had backed her decision without hesitation, adding child-sized furniture and activities to the plans. "There," Jessica said, stepping back to evaluate her work. "What do you think?" Mrs. Abernathy, Emma's school counselor and now a regular client, studied her reflection with evident delight. "It's perfect, Jessica. Absolutely perfect." She touched her new layered bob with wonder. "I feel like myself again, only better." This was the reaction Jessica lived for now, the moment when a client saw themselves transformed, not into someone different, but into an enhanced version of who they already were. It was a gift she hadn't known she possessed until necessity had forced her to discover it. As Mrs. Abernathy settled her bill with Diane, the receptionist Jessica had hired the previous month, the salon door chimed. Jessica looked up to see a familiar figure entering, Samantha, elegant as always, today in a cream silk blouse and tailored trousers. "My dear, this place is still as magnificent as opening day," Samantha declared, kissing Jessica's cheek. "And perpetually busy, I see." It was true. Parker-style studio had opened to immediate success, thanks partly to Jessica's established clientele and partly to Michael's strategic marketing. Her appointment book was filled weeks in advance, and she'd already hired a junior stylist to handle simpler services. "We're doing well," Jessica acknowledged, guiding Samantha to the private styling room reserved for VIP clients. "Better than I expected, honestly." "Not better than I expected," Samantha corrected with a knowing smile. "I told you from the beginning you had something special." She settled into the styling chair, studying Jessica's reflection in the mirror. "The question is, how are you doing? Really?" Jessica began combing through Samantha's silver hair, considering the question. The past year had been a whirlwind of change, from abandoned wife to struggling single mother to successful business owner. Each day brought new challenges: managing staff, ordering supplies, balancing the books while still maintaining the creative energy that had started it all. "I'm adapting," she answered finally, "learning as I go." "And Michael Williams, how does he fit into this adaptation?" Samantha's eyes in the mirror were shrewd, missing nothing. Jessica focused on sectioning Samantha's hair, buying time. Michael had become a constant presence in her life as business partner, advisor, and increasingly friend. He dropped by the salon regularly, often bringing lunch or coffee. He remembered her children's preferences and allergies. He listened when she spoke, really listened, in a way Robert never had. "Michael is very supportive," she said carefully. "Supportive?" Samantha repeated with a raised eyebrow. "Is that what we're calling it?" Before Jessica could formulate a response, the salon door chimed again. Through the open door of the private room, she caught a glimpse of the new arrival and froze, scissors suspended in mid-air. Heather Williams stood in the reception area, her perfect blonde locks cascading over shoulders, clad in a designer blazer. Robert's fiancée, no wife now if the gossip was accurate, was scanning the salon with the entitled gaze of someone accustomed to immediate attention. "Jessica." Samantha's voice seemed to come from far away. "You've gone pale." "It's Heather," Jessica whispered, her hand instinctively tightening on the scissors. "Robert's Heather." Understanding dawned on Samantha's face. Ah, the usurper herself. She twisted in the chair to get a better look. Well, she's pretty enough, I suppose, in that pampered pedigree way. Jessica barely heard her. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. Was Robert nearby? Had Heather come deliberately to scout her business, to evaluate her success? Was this some kind of power play? Diane approached Heather, consultation tablet in hand. From her gestures and Heather's responses, it was clear that Heather was requesting an appointment. "I should go out there," Jessica said, though her feet felt rooted to the floor. "Only if you want to." Samantha's voice was calm. "You can have Diane schedule her with your assistant, or you can face her directly and show her exactly what you're made of. Either choice is valid." Jessica took a deep breath, setting down her scissors and straightening her shoulders. "I need to do this myself." As she stepped into the main salon area, Jessica was suddenly acutely aware of every detail of her appearance. The simple but elegant black dress she wore as her salon uniform, her own expertly styled hair, the minimal gold jewelry that had been a gift from Michael on the salon's opening day. "Ms. Williams," she said, extending her hand with a professionalism that cost her dearly. "I'm Jessica Parker, owner and lead stylist." Heather's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly as she accepted the handshake. "Jessica Parker," she repeated, as if testing the name. "Robert's ex-wife." So she knew. The confirmation sent a cold spike through Jessica's chest, but she maintained her composure. "That's right. What brings you to Parker-style studio today?" Heather glanced around the salon, taking in the sophisticated decor and busy styling stations. "Your reputation, actually. Eleanor Williams speaks very highly of you, and I've noticed several of my friends sporting new looks they attribute to your talent." The slight pause suggested skepticism. "I'm honored by the recommendation," Jessica replied evenly. "We're currently booking about 3 weeks out, but—" "I have an event this weekend," Heather interrupted. "A charity gala that Robert and I are co-hosting with my father." Her smile was all perfect teeth and calculated charm. "I was hoping you might make an exception, given the family connection." The family connection. As if they were distant cousins rather than women connected by Robert's betrayal. Jessica felt a slow burn of anger in her chest, but with it came a surprising clarity. This woman, this polished, privileged woman with her casual arrogance, held no power over her anymore. "I understand the urgency," Jessica said, her voice steady. "As it happens, I had a cancellation for Friday afternoon. I'd be happy to work you in personally." Surprise flickered across Heather's features. Quickly, masked. "That's very accommodating of you." "Professional courtesy," Jessica replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Diane will get you scheduled and note your preferences for the appointment." As Jessica returned to Samantha in the private styling room, her heart hammered against her ribs. She picked up her scissors, noting with satisfaction that her hands were perfectly steady. "Well?" Samantha prompted. "I'm doing her hair on Friday," Jessica stated, resuming work on Samantha's style as if the interruption had never occurred. Samantha stared at her in the mirror. "You're either a saint or plotting elaborate sabotage involving green hair dye." Jessica laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuineness. "Neither. I'm a professional, and perhaps I want to see for myself what Robert left us for." "And?" Samantha pressed. Jessica considered the beautiful, polished woman in the reception area, a woman whose perfect exterior revealed nothing of her interior landscape. Had she loved Robert, or merely seen him as a useful acquisition? Did she wake sometimes in the night, reaching for him with genuine affection? Did she know his habit of humming off-key in the shower, or how he couldn't resist stopping for any dog he passed on the street. "And nothing," Jessica said finally. "She's just a client with difficult hair and an important event. I'll make her look beautiful because that's what I do." As she spoke the words, Jessica realized they were true. Somewhere in the past year, Heather and Robert had stopped being the central characters in her story. Their betrayal had been the catalyst, yes, the earthquake that had destroyed her old life, but from those ruins she had built something new, something that was entirely hers. "You know," Samantha said thoughtfully, "a year ago you couldn't even look at a photograph of Robert without crying. Now you're scheduling his new wife for a styling appointment." "A lot can change in a year," Jessica agreed, meeting her friend's eyes in the mirror. "Indeed it can," Samantha smiled. "Indeed it can. Mom, look what I made." Ethan burst into Jessica's home office, brandishing a paper covered in colorful scribbles. At 6 years old, his energy remained boundless, though now it was increasingly channeled into creative pursuits rather than furniture climbing. Jessica set aside the supply order she'd been reviewing. "Let me see this masterpiece." "It's our family," Ethan explained, pointing to each figure. "That's you and Emma and Noah and me, and that's Michael and his grandma." He hesitated, finger hovering over a smaller figure at the edge of the paper. "And that's Dad, but he doesn't live with us, so I made him smaller." Jessica's throat tightened as she studied the drawing. It had been 18 months since Robert's departure, 14 months since the opening of Parker Style Studio, and 6 months since Heather's first appointment, which had, against all odds, become a regular booking. Robert's new wife had proven to be a valuable client, referring several of her social circle to the salon. They maintained a cordial, strictly professional relationship that Jessica considered one of her greatest personal accomplishments. "It's wonderful," she told Ethan, pulling him into a hug. "Especially how you use different colors for everyone's hair." "Michael's is brown with the little gray parts," Ethan said proudly, pointing to the carefully rendered streaks at the temples of one figure. "Like salt and pepper," he says. The mention of Michael brought a familiar warmth to Jessica's chest. Over the past year, he had transitioned from business partner to trusted friend to something more. Something still undefined but increasingly important, not just to Jessica, but to her children as well. Michael joined them for movie nights and Sunday picnics. He attended Emma's school plays and Ethan's t-ball games. He rocked Noah when the toddler was fussy and read bedtime stories with character voices that left the children breathless with laughter. Yet despite the clear deepening of their relationship, Jessica had maintained certain boundaries. They had never defined what they were to each other. They had never acknowledged the way his hand sometimes lingered on hers, or how her eyes followed him when he thought she wasn't looking. And they had certainly never kissed, though there had been moments, quiet evenings on her porch after the children were asleep, lingering goodbyes at her doorstep, when the possibility hung in the air, between them like a tangible thing. "Can I put it on the refrigerator?" Ethan asked, reclaiming the drawing. "Absolutely," Jessica agreed, rising from her desk. "Let's find the special magnets." As they headed toward the kitchen, the doorbell rang. Emma, now 7 and increasingly independent, called from the living room, "I'll get it, Mum." "Check who it is first," Jessica reminded her, but Emma had already pulled open the door. "Michael," her daughter exclaimed with delight, "did you bring the ice cream? You promised Rocky Road this time." Michael's warm laugh carried down the hallway. "Hello to you too, Emma. And yes, I remembered the Rocky Road plus mint chocolate chip for your mom and strawberry for Noah." "And chocolate chip cookie dough for me?" Ethan asked, abandoning the drawing to race toward the door. "Would I forget the most important flavor?" Michael appeared in the kitchen doorway, grocery bags in hand, and Jessica's children dancing around him like excited puppies. His eyes found hers over their heads, warm with affection. "Hey, you." "Hey, yourself," Jessica replied, feeling the familiar flutter in her chest that his presence always evoked. "I see you've been promoted from occasional dinner guest to official ice cream supplier." "It's a sacred responsibility," he agreed solemnly, setting the bags on the counter. "One I take very seriously." As the children eagerly helped unpack the groceries, Michael had brought far more than just ice cream, including ingredients for the homemade pizza they'd planned for dinner. Jessica observed the easy domesticity of the scene. This man, who had every advantage of wealth and position, seemed entirely content, spending his Friday evening making pizza with 3 boisterous children in her modest kitchen. "Oh, I almost forgot," Michael said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "I brought something else, too, for you." He handed Jessica a small velvet box. Not a jewelry box, she noted, with mingled relief and disappointment, but something larger. "What's this?" she asked, opening it to reveal an ornate antique key. Michael's expression grew more serious. "It's the key to a property I've acquired, a historic building on Maple Street that used to be a grand hotel in the 1920s. The ground floor has been renovated as commercial space." He paused, watching her expression carefully. "I thought it might be perfect for expanding Parker style." "Studio?" Jessica stared at him. "Expanding? Michael, we've only been open 14 months, and you're booked solid for 6 weeks. You've had to hire 2 more stylists just to keep up with demand. Your client list includes half the influential women in 3 counties. His eyes shone with conviction. "You've outgrown your current location, Jessica." The truth of his words resonated with concerns she'd been harboring for months. The salon was indeed flourishing beyond her expectations. Clients were willing to wait weeks for appointments. She'd been approached about carrying her own line of hair products. Just last week, a bridal magazine had requested an interview. "It's too soon," she protested weakly. "The investment risk is mine to take," Michael interrupted gently. "As your business partner, I'm telling you this is the logical next step. The lower risk would be staying where you are and turning away clients." "And as something more than my business partner?" Robert's interruption was cold, calculated to wound. "Heather had some interesting insights about your relationship with Michael Williams. How long has that been going on, Jessica? Before or after our marriage ended?" Jessica pressed her back against the wall, struggling to make sense of his accusation. "Michael and I met after you left. He's my business partner. And more, from what I hear, spending nights at your house, taking my children on outings as if he has the right." "Your children?" Jessica's shock was giving way to anger. "The children you see once a month at best, the school events you miss, the birthdays you remember with gift cards." "I've been building our future," Robert snapped, "working 60-hour weeks to provide security. And now I'm in a position to give them everything they deserve. The best schools, the right connections, the Williams name and all it entails." Understanding dawned with sickening clarity. "This isn't about the children at all. This is about you cementing your position with the Williams family." "Don't be melodramatic," Robert dismissed. "But consider what sounds better to a family court judge. 3 children living in a modest home, with a single mother who runs a hair salon, or living in a Williams estate with 2 parents, one of whom is their biological father, with access to elite education and every advantage." Jessica closed her eyes, fighting back nausea. Robert had never been cruel during their marriage, distant sometimes, self-absorbed often, but never deliberately hurtful. This calculated attack was something new, something shaped by ambition and, she suspected, Heather's influence. "The children need stability," she managed finally. "Tearing them away from their home, their school, their friends, they'll adapt," Robert cut in. "Children always do." After extracting a promise that he would send the legal papers through proper channels rather than blindsiding her, Jessica ended the call. She stood in the hallway of her beautiful new salon, surrounded by the evidence of her success, and felt more vulnerable than she had in the darkest days after Robert's departure. She completed Mrs. Harrington's consultation on autopilot, her mind racing through scenarios, each more devastating than the last. Would a judge consider Michael's presence in their lives inappropriate? Would her success as a business owner count in her favor, or suggest she was too busy for proper parenting? How could she afford the kind of legal representation needed to battle the Williams family resources? By closing time, Jessica felt hollowed out by anxiety. She'd managed to maintain her professional composure through her remaining appointments, but now, as the last client left and the staff began their closing routines, the full weight of Robert's threat crashed over her. "Jessica!" Michael's voice startled her from her thoughts. He stood in the doorway of her office, concern evident in his expression. "Diane called me. She said something happened this morning that upset you." The sight of him, solid, dependable, caring, nearly undid her composure. "Robert called," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "He's filing for custody of the children." Michael crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her into an embrace that felt like sanctuary. "Tell me everything," he said against her hair. She did, haltingly at first, then with increasing emotion as she recounted Robert's accusations and threats. Michael listened without interruption, his body tense against hers. "He can't do this," she concluded, pulling back to search his face. "Can he?" Michael's expression was grave. "He can try, but we won't let him succeed." "We?" Jessica stepped away, creating space between them. "That's part of the problem, Michael. He's using our relationship against me, suggesting there's something inappropriate about you spending time with the children." Understanding dawned in Michael's eyes. "I see, so I'm a liability now." "I didn't say that." Jessica ran a hand through her hair in frustration. "But the reality is, we've never defined what we are to each other. You're my business partner. You're a friend who spends time with my family. But legally, you have no standing in my children's lives, and that ambiguity could hurt my case." "Then let's define it," Michael said simply. "Let's eliminate the ambiguity." Jessica stared at him. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you, Jessica Parker." The words hung in the air between them, profound in their simplicity. "I have for months now. I love your children. I love the life we've been building together, undefined as it might be. And I'm not going to let Robert use our relationship as a weapon against you." Tears welled in Jessica's eyes. "Michael, this isn't how I wanted—" "I know," he acknowledged gently. "This isn't how I planned to tell you either. But sometimes life doesn't follow our careful plans." He took her hands in his. Jessica asked, the words escaping before she could reconsider them. Michael's expression softened. "As someone who cares deeply about you and believes in what you're building, I think you're ready for this. I think you've been ready since the day you first cut your own hair in a bathroom mirror. The memory of that desperate day, the sound of the scissors, the weight lifting from her shoulders with each fallen strand, felt like it belonged to another lifetime, another woman. Yet it remained the pivotal moment that had set her on this unexpected path. "Can we see it?" Emma asked, breaking the moment. She'd been listening to the conversation with characteristic attentiveness. "The new salon place?" "Tomorrow, if your mum agrees," Michael replied, never breaking eye contact with Jessica. "It needs some vision to see its potential. Fortunately, your mum specializes in seeing potential where others don't." Later, after pizza had been made and eaten, ice cream consumed, and children tucked into bed with Michael's assistance, they sat together on Jessica's small back porch. The spring night was cool but pleasant, scented with the jasmine climbing her fence. "You don't have to decide tonight," Michael said, breaking the comfortable silence. "About the new location." "I know." Jessica turned the antique key over, in her palm, feeling its weight, its history, its possibility. "But I think I already have. I want to see it tomorrow." Michael smiled, reaching out to cover her hand with his. "I hoped you might say that." "Michael," Jessica began, then hesitated. "What are we doing?" He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Building something, I think. Step by step." His thumb traced gentle circles on her wrist. "Unless I've misread everything." "You haven't," she admitted softly. "But it's complicated. I have the children to consider. And you're my business partner, and—" "Jessica," he interrupted gently, "I'm not asking for definitions or commitments tonight. I'm just acknowledging what I believe we both feel." His eyes, warm and sincere in the porch light, held hers. "I care about you and Emma, Ethan, and Noah more than I expected to when I first proposed a business partnership. The rest, we can figure out as we go." The simplicity of his approach, the absence of pressure or expectation, loosened something that had been knotted inside Jessica's chest for months. Michael wasn't Robert, who had made promises he'd never intended to keep. Michael showed his intentions through consistent actions, through presence, through respect for her boundaries and her children's needs. "Okay," she said, turning her hand to interlace her fingers with his. "We'll figure it out as we go." They sat in comfortable silence, hands joined, watching fireflies begin to appear in her small backyard. Tomorrow would bring decisions about business expansion, about growth, about next steps. But tonight, in this quiet moment of connection, Jessica allowed herself to acknowledge another kind of growth, the tentative, tender roots of something new taking hold in the terrain of her heart. "Ms. Parker, there's a call for you online. One, he says it's urgent." Jessica looked up from the client consultation she was conducting in her private office at the new, expanded Parker-style studio. 2 months had passed since she'd accepted Michael's key and his vision for growth. The renovated historic building now housed not just a larger salon space, but a small spa area offering complimentary beauty services and a dedicated bridal suite for wedding parties. "Can you take a message, Diane? I'm with Mrs. Harrington." The older client waved a bejeweled hand. "Take the call, dear. I'm still deciding between the highlights you suggested and something more dramatic for my granddaughter's wedding." Jessica smiled gratefully and picked up the phone. "This is Jessica Parker." "Jessica?" Robert's voice, once so familiar and now strangely distant, made her spine stiffen. "We need to talk." She excused herself from Mrs. Harrington with practiced grace and stepped into the hallway, heart hammering. "Robert, is everything all right? Are you calling about the children?" His bitter laugh scraped against her ear. In a manner of speaking, "I'm calling about custody. Specifically, I want you to know I'm filing for full custody next week." The world seemed to tilt beneath Jessica's feet. "What? Why would you? You haven't even used all your visitation time in months." "Things have changed," Robert replied, his voice clipped. "Heather and I have been discussing our future. She thinks it would be best if the children lived with us permanently. They could attend Westridge Academy, have access to better opportunities." "Better opportunities?" Jessica repeated incredulously. "They're thriving, Robert. Emma's at the top of her class. Ethan's coach says he has natural athletic ability. Noah isn't mine, apparently. I'm not proposing marriage or making demands. I'm just telling you that I'm here, fully committed to you and your children, in whatever capacity serves you best right now." Jessica looked down at their joined hands, overwhelmed by the confrontation with Robert, and now by Michael's declaration. In the space of 1 day, she'd been threatened with the loss of everything that mattered most, then offered a love so generous it took her breath away. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to think, to figure out our next steps." "Of course." Michael released her hands, giving her the space she requested. "I'll call my lawyer tonight. She's the best family court attorney in the state. This isn't something you have to face alone, Jessica." As he turned to leave, Jessica called after him. "Michael!" He paused, looking back. "I love you too. I think I have for a while. I just didn't know how to say it first." His smile transformed his face, erasing the tension that had settled there during their conversation. "Then whatever comes next, we'll face it together." After he'd gone, Jessica sat alone in her office, touched by Michael's declaration, yet still shaken by Robert's threat. The children were spending the night at Samantha's, a regular arrangement that allowed Jessica to work late on Thursdays, which gave her one night to process everything before she would need to present a calm facade for their benefit. One thought kept circling in her mind, persistent as a heartbeat. She had built a new life from the ruins of her marriage, and she would not allow Robert to demolish it for his own ambition. The woman who had once crumbled at the news of her husband's betrayal now straightened her shoulders, pulled out a legal pad, and began to make notes. This was a battle she had not chosen, but it was one she would not lose. The court calls Jessica Parker to the stand. Jessica rose on unsteady legs, smoothing the skirt of her conservative navy suit, chosen carefully with the guidance of Rebecca Winters, the formidable attorney Michael had engaged for her custody battle. 3 months had passed since Robert's threatening phone call. 3 months of depositions and character statements, of children's interviews with court-appointed psychologists, of scrutiny into every aspect of Jessica's life as a mother and business owner. As she took the oath and settled into the witness chair, Jessica surveyed the courtroom. Robert and Heather sat at the plaintiff's table, both impeccably dressed and projecting an image of stability and affluence. Michael occupied a seat directly behind Jessica's table, his presence a silent pillar of support, though they had agreed he would maintain a respectful distance during the proceedings to avoid feeding Robert's narrative. "Ms. Parker," Robert's attorney began, a sleek woman whose perfectly coiffed hair Jessica could have improved, "please describe your typical workday schedule." "I begin work at 9, after dropping the children at school and daycare," Jessica replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I see clients until 3, when Emma and Ethan finish school. My former mother-in-law, picks them up and brings them to the salon, where they do homework in my office. Noah is in the salon's childcare program during my working hours." "And how many hours per week would you say you devote to your business?" "Between 40 and 50, including administrative work I do from home after the children are asleep." "So you work full-time plus overtime while raising 3 young children alone," the attorney noted, making it sound like an accusation rather than an accomplishment. "Let's talk about your relationship with Michael Williams." Rebecca stood immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Williams is Ms. Parker's business partner. His relationship with my client has no bearing on her fitness as a mother." "I'll allow it," the judge ruled, "but keep it relevant to the custody matter, Counselor." The attorney smiled thinly. "Ms. Parker, isn't it true that Michael Williams spends significant time at your home, often staying overnight?" Jessica fought to keep her expression neutral. "Michael is a close friend who occasionally helps with the children." "A friend who shares your bedroom?" Rebecca objected again, more forcefully. The judge sustained it, but the damage was done. The insinuation hung in the air. For the next hour, Jessica endured a methodical dissection of her life choices. The decision to open a business while raising small children, the hours spent away from home, the inclusion of Michael in family activities. The attorney painted a picture of chaos and impropriety, of children shuffled between caregivers, while their mother pursued professional ambitions and romantic entanglements. By the time Rebecca began her redirect examination, Jessica felt hollowed out, exposed in ways she hadn't anticipated despite their preparation. "Jessica," Rebecca began, her tone deliberately warm, "please tell the court about your children's progress since your separation from Mr. Parker." Grateful for the lifeline, Jessica described Emma's academic achievements, Ethan's growing confidence, Noah's developmental milestones, all documented in reports Rebecca had submitted to the court. She explained the systems she had created to ensure the children's needs were met, while she built a sustainable future for them. She spoke of homework routines and bedtime stories, of weekend adventures and family traditions maintained, despite the upheaval of divorce. "And how have the children adjusted to Mr. Williams' presence in their lives?" Rebecca asked carefully. Jessica's eyes briefly met Michael's in the gallery. "They've responded positively. Michael has been respectful of their relationship with their father, while providing consistent positive male support. He attends their school events, helps with homework, and listens to their concerns. He's never tried to replace Robert, just to support the children in their current reality." As she was dismissed from the stand, Jessica returned to her seat feeling drained but hopeful. Rebecca had done an admirable job countering the negative portrayal of her life. The judge seemed thoughtful rather than judgmental. Perhaps they had a chance. The court recessed for lunch and Jessica escaped to a small conference room Rebecca had secured for privacy. Michael joined them briefly, bringing sandwiches and quiet reassurance before returning to the courtroom to save their seats. Rebecca reviewed the morning's testimony, strategizing for the afternoon session where Robert would take the stand. "He'll present himself as the stable, financially secure parent," Rebecca warned. "With the Williams family backing him, he can offer material advantages we can't match. But we've documented his minimal involvement in the children's daily lives. That's our strongest counter." Jessica nodded, pushing away her half-eaten sandwich. "Will the judge see through it? The sudden interest in custody after nearly 2 years of bare minimum parenting?" "Judge Hernandez has 20 years' experience in family court," Rebecca replied. "She's seen this pattern before. Absent parent suddenly seeking custody when circumstances change. She squeezed Jessica's hand. Stay focused. Your strength has gotten you this far. When court reconvened, Robert took the stand with practiced confidence. Under his attorney's questioning, he described the stable home he and Heather could provide, a spacious house on the Williams estate, private school enrollments already secured, a nursery designed for Noah, rooms decorated to Emma, and Ethan's specifications based on photos Robert had taken during his infrequent visits. "Mr. Parker," his attorney asked, "why seek custody now when you've been content with visitation for the past 2 years?" Robert's expression shifted to one of rehearsed remorse. "I've made mistakes," he admitted. "After our separation, I was focused on establishing financial security. I thought that was what my children needed most from me, a father who could provide for their future." He glanced at Jessica. "I didn't realize how quickly they would grow and change without me. When Heather and I married, she helped me see what I was missing." The calculated performance made Jessica's stomach churn. This was not the Robert she'd been married to, the man who'd forgotten school conferences and bedtime routines, who'd been irritated by childhood illnesses interrupting his sleep, who'd never once volunteered to coach Ethan's T-ball team despite Jessica's encouragement. "And what can you offer your children that their mother cannot?" the attorney prompted. "Stability," Robert replied without hesitation. "Her traditional 2-parent home, financial resources for the best education and opportunities, connections that will serve them throughout their lives." He smiled sadly. "Jessica is a wonderful mother in many ways, but her focus on building her business has created a chaotic environment for the children. They deserve consistency." When Rebecca began cross-examination, her approach was methodical, almost gentle. She established Robert's visitation history, the missed weekends, the shortened visits, the last-minute cancellations. She reviewed his attendance at school events, minimal, and knowledge of the children's medical history, limited. She presented the court with a calendar documenting his involvement over the past year, the blank spaces speaking volumes. "Mr. Parker," Rebecca said finally, "when was the last time you attended one of Emma's parent-teacher conferences?" Robert shifted uncomfortably. "I don't recall the exact date. Would it surprise you to learn she's had 3 this year, and you were invited to all of them?" The victory had been sweet, but tempered by the knowledge that Robert could petition for modification in the future. Still, it was enough to let Jessica breathe again, to plan, to continue building the life she had fought so hard to create. "What are you making anyway?" Jessica asked, moving to help Noah with his own craft project. At nearly 3, his artistic endeavors were more enthusiastic than precise. "It's a family tree for school," Emma explained, "but I'm doing it differently than the example Mrs. Calloway showed us." Jessica peered over at the complex diagram, taking shape on the dining room table. Instead of the traditional tree structure, Emma had created something that looked more like interlocking circles. "That's very creative, Em. Can you explain it to me?" Emma pointed to various circles as she spoke. "This big one is our main family, you, me, Ethan, and Noah. Then this one is Dad and Heather. See how they overlap a little with our circle? That's because Dad is still our dad even though he doesn't live with us." Jessica nodded, emotion tightening her throat at her daughter's matter-of-fact acceptance of their complex family structure. "And this circle," Emma continued, "is Michael and his grandmother, Eleanor. They overlap a lot with our circle because they're almost like our family now, too." She looked up at Jessica, her expression suddenly uncertain. "Is that okay, to put Michael in our family tree?" Jessica sat down beside her daughter, choosing her words carefully. In the weeks since the custody hearing, her relationship with Michael had deepened, solidified by the shared experience of fighting for her children. They had made no formal announcements, but the nature of their commitment to each other was clear to everyone who mattered. "Family comes in many different shapes," Jessica said finally. "Some people are born into our family, like you and your brothers. Some become family because of marriage, like Dad and Heather are to each other. And some people choose to be family because of love and caring, which is how Michael and Eleanor fit into our lives." Emma considered this, then nodded decisively. That's what I thought. She returned to her cutting with renewed confidence. Mrs. Calloway says family trees help us understand where we come from, but I think they also show us where we're going. From the wisdom of children, Jessica thought, feeling a rush of pride in Emma's emotional intelligence. I think you're absolutely right, sweetheart. Later that afternoon, as Jessica prepared dinner with Michael's assistance, he had proven, surprisingly adept in the kitchen, she found herself reflecting on Emma's project. The visual representation of their interconnected lives seemed more accurate than any traditional family tree could have been. You're thoughtful tonight, Michael observed, pausing in his vegetable chopping to study her face. Emma's making a family tree for school, Jessica explained. But she's designed it as overlapping circles instead of branches. She included you and Eleanor in our family circle. Michael's hands stilled, emotion flashing across his features. How do you feel about that? Like she sees the truth more clearly than most adults, Jessica replied honestly. You have become family to us, Michael. Not in a traditional way, perhaps, but in all the ways that matter. He set down his knife and crossed the small kitchen to stand before her. I've been waiting for the right moment to bring something up, he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. But perhaps there is no perfect moment for important conversations. Jessica felt a flutter of apprehension. That sounds ominous. Not at all, he assured her quickly. It's about the salon, or rather about what comes next. Parker-style studio had continued to flourish beyond even Michael's optimistic projections. They now employed 8 stylists plus support staff, and had expanded their service offerings to include a full range of beauty treatments. Jessica divided her time between styling for her loyal original clients and managing the growing business. What about it? She asked, curious now. I've had several inquiries from investors, Michael explained. People who see the potential for Parker-style studios, plural, in other locations, possibly even a franchise model eventually. Jessica stared at him. You want to expand to multiple locations? Only if you do, he replied carefully. The business decisions remain yours, Jessica. I'm just presenting opportunities as they arise. The possibility expanded in her mind. Not just one successful salon, but a brand, a legacy she could build for her children. It was so far beyond what she had imagined when she first cut Samantha's hair in a sunlit conservatory that it momentarily took her breath away. I don't know, she admitted. The salon is finally running smoothly. The children are settled into their routine. I've been extremely busy with work. Yes, building security for your children's future, Rebecca acknowledged. The same future you now want to dramatically alter by removing them from their primary caregiver, their school, their friends, and their established routines. She let the statement hang for a moment. One last question, Mr. Parker. Did your decision to seek custody coincide with Michael Williams's investment in your ex-wife's business? Robert's attorney objected immediately, but Jessica saw the flicker of confirmation in Robert's expression before he composed himself. The connection Rebecca had drawn between Robert's custody bid and his apparent competition with Michael's position in Jessica's life was subtle but unmistakable. As the hearing continued through the afternoon, Jessica felt herself cycling between hope and despair. Character witnesses spoke on both sides. The children's court-appointed advocate presented findings that seemed, to Jessica's anxious ear, frustratingly neutral. By the time closing arguments began, she was exhausted by the emotional pendulum. Rebecca's closing was passionate but measured, emphasizing the stability Jessica had created despite difficult circumstances, the children's documented well-being, and Robert's historically minimal involvement. Robert's attorney countered with promises of advantages and opportunities, subtly suggesting that Jessica's business commitments and personal relationship with Michael created an unsuitable environment. When the judge announced she would review the evidence and issue her ruling the following week, Jessica felt suspended in uncertainty. The possibility of losing her children, the unimaginable horror of having them removed from her care to satisfy Robert's ambition and Heather's plans, left her barely able to function as she gathered her belongings. Michael found her in the courthouse hallway, her face pale and drawn. "Let me take you home," he said gently, guiding her toward the exit with a protective hand at her back. In the car, the emotions she'd suppressed throughout the hearing finally broke free. Sobs tore from her chest as Michael held her, his own eyes damp with helpless sympathy. "I can't lose them," she gasped between sobs. "They're everything. Everything I've worked for. Everything I love." "You won't lose them," Michael promised, though they both knew it wasn't a guarantee he could make. The truth was clear in that courtroom today. Judge Hernandez will see it. As her tears subsided, Jessica became aware of a new sensation. Beneath the fear, a quiet, steely determination. She had overcome abandonment, financial crisis, and professional uncertainty. She had built a life and a business from nothing. She would not surrender her children without using every resource, every ounce of strength she possessed. "I need to pick them up from Samantha's," she said, straightening in her seat. "They'll be wondering where I am." Michael studied her face, recognizing the resolve that had replaced despair. "I'll drive you," he said simply. That night, after the children were asleep, Jessica sat on her back porch swing, Michael beside her in companionable silence. The cool evening air carried the scent of jasmine and the distant sound of cicadas. The ordinary beauty of the moment, this quiet ending to a day of extraordinary tension, suddenly seemed precious beyond measure. "Thank you," she said finally, "for everything today. For all of it, really." Michael's hand found hers in the darkness. "Jessica, whatever happens next week, whatever the judge decides, I want you to know something." His voice was steady, certain. "I'm not going anywhere. If we have to appeal, we will. If we have to fight for years, we will. This isn't the end of anything." Jessica leaned her head against his shoulder, drawing strength from his solid presence. In 7 days, a stranger would decide the most important aspect of her future. The uncertainty was excruciating, the potential loss unthinkable. But in this moment, with Michael's hand warm around hers and her children sleeping safely under her roof, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of justice and in the power of the new life she had built from the ashes of the old. "Be careful with those scissors, Emma, they're very sharp." Jessica watched as her daughter carefully cut along the marked line on the construction paper. At 8 years old, Emma's dexterity had improved remarkably, but Jessica still felt the maternal instinct to hover when sharp objects were involved. "I know, Mom," Emma replied, with the patience of a child accustomed to such warnings. "I'm being super careful." 5 weeks had passed since Judge Hernandez had delivered her ruling. Primary physical custody would remain with Jessica, with Robert granted expanded visitation rights and shared legal custody. One life-changing decision at a time, perhaps. As they sat together in the gentle spring darkness, Jessica felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The path from that desperate day with bathroom scissors to this moment of quiet joy had been neither straight nor easy. There had been detours and obstacles, moments of crushing doubt and hard-won triumph. But each step, even the painful ones, had led her here, to a life richer and more authentically hers than she could have imagined when Robert first walked away. "A little to the left," Jessica directed, watching as the craftsman adjusted the gilded sign above the entrance. "Perfect. Right there." The elegant script proclaimed Parker-style studio against a background of deep blue, while smaller lettering beneath added an atelier of personal transformation. The flagship location of what would soon become a regional chain of salons stood, ready for its grand opening, the renovated historic building transformed into a space that perfectly embodied Jessica's vision of accessible luxury and creative artistry. "It looks magnificent," Eleanor Williams commented, standing beside Jessica on the sidewalk. At 82, Michael's grandmother remained sharp as ever, though she now relied on a decorative cane for stability. "You've created something extraordinary. Here, my dear." Jessica smiled at the older woman who had become a cherished mentor and friend. "With considerable help from you and Michael," she acknowledged. "I couldn't have done this alone." "Nonsense," Eleanor dismissed with a wave of her elegantly manicured hand. "Michael provided capital and business acumen. I contributed some connections, but the vision, the heart of this enterprise, that's entirely yours." The past year had been a whirlwind of professional expansion and personal joy. Jessica and Michael had married in a simple ceremony in Eleanor's garden, with Emma as flower girl, Ethan as ring bearer, and Noah toddling down the aisle in a miniature suit that had delighted the guests. Robert and Heather had attended, their presence initially awkward, but ultimately contributing to a sense of expanded family that Emma's overlapping circles had so perfectly captured. In the months following the wedding, Jessica and Michael had developed a business plan for strategic expansion. The original salon continued to thrive under the management of Jessica's first assistant, now promoted to location director. The new flagship would serve as both working salon and training center, where Jessica could share her techniques with apprentice stylists while developing her growing product line. "Mom!" Emma called, emerging from the salon's entrance. At 9, she carried herself with a poise that sometimes startled Jessica. "The flowers for the reception area just arrived. They're gorgeous." "I'll be right there, sweetie," Jessica replied, giving a final approving nod to the sign installers before following her daughter inside. The interior of the new Parker-style studio reflected everything Jessica had learned about creating an environment of transformation. Soft lighting flattered every complexion. Comfortable seating invited conversation, and strategically placed mirrors allowed clients to witness their evolution. The color palette of muted blues and warm neutrals created a sense of calm sophistication, while touches of gold and crystal added subtle luxury. In the center of the main salon floor stood a circular styling station, Jessica's personal domain, where she would work with select clients and demonstrate techniques for the stylists she now mentored. Around this central hub, traditional styling stations created a collaborative atmosphere while maintaining client privacy. "It's everything I imagined," Jessica murmured, taking in the completed space. After months of construction delays and design adjustments, seeing her vision materialized was overwhelming. "Better," Michael corrected, appearing beside her and slipping an arm around her waist. "It's better than you imagined because it's real." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "How are the nerves holding up? Opening gala is just 3 hours away." Jessica leaned into his solid presence. "Surprisingly steady. Having done this once before helps, I suppose." "Having succeeded wildly the first time certainly doesn't hurt," Michael agreed with a smile. "The guest list for tonight reads like a who's who of regional influence. Your reputation precedes you, Mrs. Williams." "Parker Williams in professional contexts," Jessica reminded him with a gentle nudge. They had discussed at length how to handle her name after marriage. For personal matters, she had happily taken Michael's surname, but her professional identity remained connected to the Parker brand she had built. "Of course," Michael acknowledged, with a mock bow. The formidable Jessica Parker Williams, artistic visionary and business mogul, who tolerates her husband's occasional lapses in protocol. Starting over with a new location would mean more hours, more stress, more time away from home. Michael nodded, unsurprised by her hesitation. "Which is why I've been thinking about our partnership structure and how it might evolve." "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, taking her hands in his, "that perhaps it's time for me to take a more active role in the business operations, freeing you to focus on creative direction and client relationships, the parts you truly love. You're an artist, Jessica. The administrative side has never been what drives you." The truth of his assessment resonated through her. As the salon had grown, she had indeed found herself less fulfilled by the paperwork and personnel management that consumed increasing portions of her time. "Are you proposing a restructuring of our business partnership?" she asked, trying to understand exactly what he was suggesting. "In a manner of speaking." Michael's hands tightened slightly around hers. "Though perhaps more accurately, I'm proposing a restructuring of several aspects of our relationship." Before Jessica could respond, Ethan burst into the kitchen, Noah toddling behind him. "Michael, can we play basketball before dinner? You promised." Michael's serious expression melted into a smile. "So I did. 10 minutes, okay? Then we need to finish helping your mum with dinner." As the boys cheered and raced back outside, Michael turned back to Jessica. "We'll continue this conversation later," he promised, "when we have proper time and privacy." Throughout dinner and the evening routine of baths, bedtime stories, and tucking in, Jessica found herself contemplating Michael's words. a restructuring. For their relationship could mean many things, some thrilling, some terrifying in their potential, to disrupt the careful balance she had established. After the children were finally asleep, Jessica joined Michael on the back porch swing that had become their place for important conversations. The spring night was mild, the garden in early bloom, the world quiet except for the gentle creaking of the swing chains and the distant hooting of an owl. "So," she said, breaking the comfortable silence, "you were saying something about restructuring our relationship." Michael turned toward her, his expression now resolved rather than hesitant. "Jessica, when I first proposed our business partnership, I did it because I recognized your extraordinary talent. I wanted to help you build something that matched your potential. And we have," she acknowledged. "The salon is successful beyond anything I could have imagined." "Yes," he agreed, "but somewhere along the way, the partnership became about much more than business for me." He took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle patterns on her palm. "I love you, Jessica Parker. I love your children. I love the family we've been creating together, unconventional as it might be." Jessica's heart quickened. "I love you too," she said softly. "You know that." "I do." His smile was tender, his eyes reflecting the soft porch light. "Which is why I'm asking if you'd consider making our partnership more comprehensive. Not just business, not just the undefined personal relationship we've built, but a marriage." He paused, gauging her reaction. "A family, officially." Though she had sensed the conversation might be heading in this direction, the actual words still caught Jessica unprepared. Her first marriage had ended so painfully, the very concept of remarriage had seemed impossible to consider. Yet here she was, contemplating exactly that with a man who had proven himself in ways Robert never had. "The children," she began. "Love me as I love them," Michael finished gently. "I'm not asking to replace Robert. He will always be their father. But I want to be there for them and for you in every way possible." Jessica thought of Emma's family tree with its overlapping circles, the wisdom in her daughter's intuitive understanding of their evolving family structure. She thought of Michael coaching Ethan's basketball team, reading stories to Noah, helping Emma with science projects. She thought of the past 2 years, the journey from broken, abandoned wife to confident business owner and mother, and Michael's steady presence through every step of that transformation. "Yes," she said simply, the single word carrying the weight of new beginnings. "Yes, I'll marry you." Michael's face transformed with joy. He drew her close, his kiss tender yet filled with promise. When they finally parted, his forehead rested against hers. "I was prepared to make a much longer case," he admitted with a soft laugh. "No need," Jessica replied, her own smile matching his. "Some decisions are complicated. This one isn't." She paused, remembering their earlier conversation. "Though the business expansion might require more discussion." Michael laughed again, the sound warm in the quiet night. Their playful moment was interrupted by Ethan's excited shout from the training room, where he and Noah had been exploring with Samantha's supervision. "Mom, Dad, come see what Noah did." The casual "Dad" still brought a flush of emotion to Michael's face, though it had been nearly 6 months since Ethan had first used the term. The adoption papers had been processed shortly after the wedding, with Robert's full consent, a gesture of unexpected maturity that had begun a gradual thawing in their co-parenting relationship. In the training room, they found Noah, now 3.5, proudly standing beside a styling mannequin whose hair had been arranged in a surprisingly decent approximation of a basic bob. "He did that?" Jessica asked, incredulous. "I just gave him the clips," Samantha confirmed, equally amazed. "He arranged it himself, said he was making it pretty like Mommy does." Jessica knelt beside her youngest, who beamed with pride. "What? Do you think Mommy is it good?" "It's wonderful, sweetheart," she assured him, examining his handiwork with professional appreciation. "You have a natural eye for balance." "Like his mother," Michael observed, ruffling Noah's dark curls. "Perhaps we're looking at the future of Parker-style studios." The thought of her children possibly continuing what she had built, of a legacy extending beyond her own career, had never occurred to Jessica before. She had been so focused on immediate survival, then on establishing stability, that long-term legacy had seemed an unaffordable luxury of thought. "First, let's get through tonight's opening," she said pragmatically, though the seed of the idea had taken root. "Speaking of which, we should head home to change. The photographer will be here in 2 hours for family photos before the guests arrive." The evening unfolded like a dream sequence. Jessica in a midnight blue gown that complemented the salon's color scheme, Michael handsome in his tuxedo, the children freshly scrubbed and improbably well-behaved in their formal attire. Civic leaders, fashion industry representatives and social influencers mingled beneath crystal chandeliers, admiring the space and congratulating Jessica on her expanding enterprise. Robert and Heather made a brief appearance, cordial and appropriate. Robert's recent promotion to regional sales director had come with a transfer option to a neighboring state, which he and Heather were considering, a development that produced complicated feelings for Jessica. Distance would make co-parenting more challenging, but might also ease the lingering tension that occasionally surfaced during custody exchanges. "Your ex-husband seems different," Samantha observed, watching Robert chat amicably with Michael across the room. "Less entitled somehow." "Failure can be instructive," Jessica replied, thinking of the custody battle that had ultimately led to their current détente. "He's learning to value what he has rather than always reaching for more." "Speaking of values," Samantha said, her tone shifting to one of ceremonial importance, "I have something for you. A grand opening gift of sorts." From her elegant clutch, she withdrew a small velvet pouch. "Open it," she instructed. Jessica loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents into her palm. A pair of small silver scissors, clearly antique with delicately engraved handles, gleamed in the warm light. "My grandmother's sewing scissors," Samantha explained. She was a dressmaker in Paris before emigrating to America. These were her first professional tools. She closed Jessica's fingers around the scissors. She always said that transforming how people presented themselves to the world was sacred work. I think she would approve of how you've taken up that mantle. Emotion tightened Jessica's throat as she carefully examined the heirloom. "Samantha, I can't accept these. They should stay in your family." "They are staying in my family," Samantha replied firmly. "You and those children became my family the day you cut my hair in my conservatory." She gestured around the elegant salon. "All of this began with a pair of scissors and a woman brave enough to use them. These deserve a place of honor in your new beginning." Before Jessica could respond, Michael clinked a knife against his champagne glass, calling for attention. The room gradually quieted as guests turned expectantly toward him. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate the expansion of Parker-style studios," he began, his voice warm with pride. "As many of you know, I'm the business partner in this enterprise, which means I handle the boring parts, finances, contracts, logistics, while the true visionary stands beside me." He turned to Jessica, extending his hand. "My wife, Jessica." Parker Williams has transformed a moment of personal crisis into an empire of empowerment. I've had the privilege of watching her journey from a woman cutting hair in a borrowed conservatory to the creative force behind what will soon be a regional brand synonymous with personalized luxury. Jessica joined him, somewhat self-conscious. Under the collective gaze of the assembled guests, but bolstered by Michael's steady presence. "Tonight isn't just about a beautiful new salon," Michael continued. "It's about the power of resilience, of refusing to be defined by circumstances, of creating beauty from difficulty." He raised his glass. "To Jessica, who reminds us all that our greatest setbacks can become the foundation for our greatest achievements, if we have the courage to rebuild." As glasses raised around the room, Jessica felt the weight of the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the bathroom mirror where she had first cut her hair in desperate defiance, to this gleaming salon that represented not just professional success but personal triumph. The antique scissors in her hand connected her to a lineage of women who had used their skills to help others present their best selves to the world, a tradition she had stumbled into through necessity, but embraced as a calling. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Jessica found a quiet moment to stand alone in the center of her new domain. The space after hours held a different kind of magic, potential energy waiting to be activated by the transformations that would soon occur within these walls. Tomorrow, clients would fill these chairs, stylists would learn and create, lives would shift in subtle ways as people discovered new aspects of themselves reflected in the mirrors. "Penny for your thoughts," Michael said softly, joining her in the quiet space. "I was just thinking about journeys," Jessica replied, leaning against him as his arms encircled her waist from behind. "How we never really know where they'll lead when we take the first step." "Any regrets?" he asked, his chin resting lightly on her head. Jessica considered the question seriously. The path had not been easy. There had been nights of bone-deep exhaustion, moments of paralyzing fear, challenges that had tested her resolve and resourcefulness. Yet each difficulty had shaped her, strengthened her, prepared her for the next opportunity disguised as an obstacle. "No," she said finally, with the certainty of a woman who had earned her wisdom. "No regrets. Just gratitude for having found the courage to keep walking forward, even when I couldn't see the destination." Michael's arms tightened around her, his love a tangible force surrounding her. Outside, the city continued its evening rhythms. Somewhere in the quiet house that had become their shared home, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge of being deeply loved. And here, in this space created from vision and determination, Jessica Parker Williams stood at the center of a life she had constructed, strand by carefully placed strand, from the remnants of what had been broken. "And this is where the magic happens," Jessica concluded, leading the small group of fashion journalists through the training center at the back of the flagship salon. "We call it the Style Lab, part classroom, part experimental studio, where our team develops new techniques and products." 5 years had passed since the opening of the flagship Parker Style studio. In that time, the brand had expanded to 6 locations across 3 states, with plans for 3 more in the coming year. The Parker product line, hair care formulated, with Jessica's exacting standards, had gained a devoted following and premium placement in luxury beauty retailers. "Ms. Parker Williams," called one of the journalists, "your rise in the beauty industry has been meteoric. Did you always envision building a brand of this scale?" Jessica laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "Not at all. When I cut my own hair, in my bathroom mirror after my ex-husband left, I was just trying to reclaim some control over my life. Everything that followed came from necessity, opportunity, and learning to bet on myself." As the press tour concluded, and the journalists departed with gift bags of Parker products, Jessica checked her watch. She had an hour before her next appointment, a quarterly planning meeting with her executive team, now 8 people strong. Just enough time to review the final details for tomorrow's charity event. The Parker Foundation's annual fundraiser had become a highlight of the regional social calendar, raising significant funds for organizations supporting single mothers and children affected by family transition. The foundation, established on the 5th anniversary of Jessica's first impromptu haircut, was her way of transforming her personal experience into broader community support. Jessica, Diane still with her after all these years, but now serving as executive assistant rather than receptionist, appeared in the doorway of Jessica's office. "There's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite insistent." Jessica frowned, checking her calendar. "I really don't have time before the executive meeting. Can you reschedule her for next week?" "I tried," Diane replied, her expression uncertain. "She says it's personal, not business, says her name is Heather Parker." Jessica's head snapped up. She hadn't seen Robert's wife in over a year, not since he had accepted a transfer to the company's West Coast division. The custody arrangement had been modified to accommodate the distance, longer visits during school breaks rather than regular weekends, and their communication had been limited to practical matters regarding the children. "Send her in," Jessica said after a moment's consideration, "and push the executive meeting back 30 minutes, please." Heather entered the office with the careful composure of someone bracing for an unpleasant encounter. At 35, she remained beautiful in a polished, deliberate way, though Jessica noticed subtle signs of strain around her eyes and mouth. "Thank you for seeing me," Heather began, remaining standing even after Jessica gestured toward a chair. "I know this is unexpected." "Please sit," Jessica insisted, professional hospitality overriding personal history. "Is everything all right? Is it about the children?" Heather finally sank into the offered chair, her rigid posture betraying her discomfort. "Not exactly. It's about Robert." She hesitated, then continued in a rush. "He's been diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's disease." The news landed with unexpected impact. Despite the pain of their divorce and the subsequent custody battle, Robert remained connected to Jessica through their children and shared history. The thought of him facing a progressive illness stirred complex emotions. "I'm very sorry to hear that," Jessica said sincerely. "Has he told Emma and Ethan?" "Not yet," Heather replied. "He wanted to wait until we had more information about treatment options and progression rates." She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "The specialists say he could have many productive years with proper management, but eventually he'll need increasing support." Jessica finished the thought when Heather trailed off. "I understand, but I'm not sure why you're telling me this in person rather than calling." Heather met her eyes directly for the first time. "Because I'm leaving him." The blunt statement hung in the air between them. Jessica stared at the woman who had once been the catalyst for her life's upheaval, trying to process this unexpected reversal. "I see," she said finally, when it became clear Heather was waiting for a response. "Again, I'm not sure what this has to do with me." "Robert will be moving back here," Heather explained, her voice carefully controlled. "He wants to be closer to Emma and Ethan, and to better medical facilities," she added almost as an afterthought. "I'll be staying in California." Jessica absorbed this information, thinking of her children, Emma now 14 and increasingly independent, Ethan 12 and passionate about basketball, both of them established in their school and community. "And you're telling me this because you should know before the children do," Heather said. "Because despite everything, you've been remarkably gracious about co-parenting. Because—" Her composure finally cracked, revealing genuine distress. "Because I don't know how to tell two children that I'm abandoning their father just when he needs support the most." The irony was almost too perfect. Jessica studied the woman across from her. Younger, wealthier, supposedly the better choice Robert had left his family to pursue, now preparing to exit when the glamour of their life together was threatened by illness. "Let me understand," Jessica said carefully. "You're leaving Robert because of his diagnosis." "It's not that simple," Heather defended, though her gaze slid away. "We've been having problems for years. This just clarified things for me. I'm not equipped to be a caregiver. It's not the life I want." Not unlike Robert deciding fatherhood wasn't the life he wanted, Jessica thought but didn't say. Instead, she asked, "What are you asking of me exactly?" "Nothing specific," Heather admitted. "I just thought you should know. Robert will be reaching out about adjusting the custody arrangement once he's settled back here, and the children might need extra support. Understanding that sometimes people leave when things get difficult." It was a lesson Jessica had hoped her children wouldn't have to learn twice. "When is all this happening?" she asked, already mentally reorganizing schedules, considering how best to support Emma and Ethan through another family transition. "Robert flies back next week to look at apartments. I'm staying in California." Heather stood abruptly. Are you for seeing me? I know we've never been friendly, but I've always respected how you handled everything, how you rebuilt." The compliment, unexpected and seemingly genuine, caught Jessica off guard. "Everyone does what they need to do," she said neutrally. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Heather." After Heather departed, Jessica remained at her desk, processing the conversation. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Robert, once again being left, now returning to the city where his first family had reconstructed a life without him. The cycle had come full circle, in a way that might have felt vindictive had Jessica still harbored resentment. But the woman who had once cut off her hair in grief and rage was not the same woman who now sat in this elegant office, surrounded by evidence of her success. The pain of Robert's betrayal had long since transformed into something else, a catalyst for growth, a necessary breaking that had allowed for stronger rebuilding. Jessica picked up her phone, dialing Michael's number. He answered on the second ring. "I was just thinking about you," he said warmly. "How's the press tour going?" "Fine, but something's come up," Jessica replied. "Robert's moving back to town. He's been diagnosed with Parkinson's, and Heather's leaving him." "What?" Michael's shock was evident even through the phone. "When did you learn this?" "About 10 minutes ago. Heather just left my office." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Michael said immediately. "We can strategize about how to support the kids through this." Jessica smiled despite the complexity of the situation. This was why she had fallen in love with Michael, his instinctive movement toward solutions, toward support, toward family cohesion, even in difficult circumstances. "The executive meeting can wait," he continued. "This is more important." "I love you," Jessica said simply. "I love you too," he replied. "And Jessica, this isn't about karma or cosmic justice. This is just life being messy the way it always is." His perception, as always, cut straight to what she needed to hear. "I know, I'll see you soon." After ending the call, Jessica walked to her office window, gazing out at the busy street below. Somewhere in this city, Robert would soon be starting yet another new chapter, one marked by physical challenge and, unless Jessica missed her guess, a healthy dose of regret for paths not taken and bridges burned. Yet despite everything, he remained her children's father. The man whose departure had inadvertently set her on the path to discovering her own strength and talent. The first chapter of a story that had evolved in ways no one could have predicted. With a soft sigh, Jessica turned back to her desk and opened her laptop. Before Michael arrived, she would research the best neurologists specializing in Parkinson's treatment, local support groups for newly diagnosed patients, and resources for explaining progressive illness to teenagers. Not because she owed Robert anything, but because compassion, even toward those who had injured you, was the true measure of healing. The woman who had once been defined by abandonment now found herself preparing to offer support to the very person who had abandoned her. Life's circles were indeed unexpected, Jessica reflected, but navigating them with grace rather than bitterness was perhaps the greatest transformation she had achieved, more significant than any business success, more enduring than any professional accolade. It was, she realized, the legacy she most hoped to pass to her children, the understanding that pain can be alchemized into purpose, that endings often contain the seeds of more beautiful beginnings, and that the truest strength lies not in never falling, but in how gracefully you rise again. "Parker Williams," Jessica answered her private line, tucking the phone between ear and shoulder as she reviewed the quarterly sales report on her desk. At 45, she had mastered the art of productive multitasking, a necessity for balancing her expanding business empire with the needs of her family. "Jessica, it's Dr. Myers." The neurologist's voice was professional but warm. "I'm calling about Robert Parker. You're still listed as his emergency contact." Jessica set down her pen, giving the call her full attention. In the 7 years since Robert's diagnosis, his condition had progressed more rapidly than initially projected. After Heather's departure, he had indeed returned to the city, eventually moving into an assisted living facility specializing in neurological conditions. As his symptoms worsened, opportunities shouldn't be sacrificed for deathbed vigils, especially when the dying part is taking its sweet time. "Robert," Jessica began, but he waved her off. "About the skilled nursing wing," he said, abruptly returning to the reason for her visit. "I know it's the logical next step. I just needed someone to talk to who remembers me before. Someone who knew Robert Parker when he could tie his own shoelaces and sign his own name." The frank vulnerability in his admission touched Jessica unexpectedly. This was a different man from the husband who had left her, humbled by illness, softened by time's passage. "I remember," she said gently, "and so do Emma and Ethan. Noah, too, in his way. Though not Robert's biological child, Noah, now 17 and passionate about design like his sister, had developed a relationship with his sibling's father over the years. Another unexpected circle closed. "Will you help with the transition?" Robert asked, his voice smaller now. "The paperwork, the arrangements, I trust your judgment more than my own these days." "Of course," Jessica agreed without hesitation. "I'll speak with Dr. Myers tomorrow." As she drove home later, Jessica found herself reflecting on the strange path that had led her from abandoned wife to successful entrepreneur to compassionate ex-spouse. The young woman who had cut her hair in desperate defiance could never have imagined sitting beside Robert's wheelchair, offering comfort rather than recrimination. Michael was waiting when she arrived home, his presence in the kitchen as he prepared dinner a familiar comfort after 15 years of marriage. "How was he?" he asked, handing her a glass of wine. "Declining," Jessica replied honestly. "But still, Robert, philosophical one moment, practical the next." She sank onto a bar stool, suddenly weary. "He's agreed to move to skilled nursing, asked me to help with the arrangements." Michael nodded, unsurprised. "And you said yes?" "I did." She took a sip of wine, studying her husband over the rim of the glass. "Does that seem strange to you? That I've become the person Robert turns to when he's vulnerable?" "Not strange," Michael corrected, returning to the vegetables he was chopping. "Poetic, maybe, full circle in a way that speaks to your character rather than his." The observation captured precisely what Jessica had been feeling, not triumph over Robert's decline, not vindication for past injuries, but a quiet recognition of how completely she had transcended the pain of their shared history. 15 years ago, she mused, I thought the end of my marriage was the end of everything. Now it feels like it was just the opening chapter of a much longer, richer story." "It was," Michael agreed, setting down his knife to meet her gaze. "A story about a woman who refused to be defined by abandonment, who built something extraordinary from a moment that could have destroyed her." Jessica smiled, the day's emotional weight lightening in the warmth of his understanding. "A story, still being written." "The best ones always are," Michael replied, leaning across the counter to kiss her gently. Later that night, as Jessica stood before the bathroom mirror, she caught herself studying her reflection, the elegant silver strands now threading through her auburn hair, the laugh lines at the corners of her eyes, the confident set of her shoulders that spoke of battles fought and won. The woman in the mirror was a world away from the devastated wife who had once stood in a different bathroom, scissors in hand, heart shattered. That desperate act, cutting away the weight of her old life, had been not an ending, but a beginning. The first step on a path that had led her through heartbreak and triumph, through professional success and personal growth, to this moment of quiet strength. Jessica touched her hair, remembering the sensation of those first fallen strands. From such small seeds, such grand transformations grew. It was a truth she had lived, a lesson she had learned in the most personal way, that sometimes the most painful cuts cleared the way for the most beautiful new growth. "Grandma, am I doing this right?" Jessica looked down at her 6-year-old granddaughter, Lily, who was carefully attempting to section a mannequin's hair with plastic training clips. Emma's daughter had inherited her mother's artistic eye and her grandmother's fascination with transformation. "Perfect, sweetheart," Jessica encouraged, gently guiding Lily's small hands. "Remember how we talked about dividing the hair into manageable pieces?" It was family day at the Parker Style Academy, the educational wing of Jessica's now international brand. Twice a year, employees brought their children and grandchildren to experience the art of hairstyling in a fun, accessible format. To everyone's surprise, perhaps most of all Jessica's, she had become a consistent support person in his life, not because of lingering romantic feelings, but out of compassion and a shared history that couldn't be erased. Emma, now 21, and in her 3rd year of university studying business and design, and Ethan, 19 and playing college basketball, had maintained relationships with their father, visiting regularly despite their busy schedules. "Is everything all right?" Jessica asked, already reaching for her calendar to clear her afternoon if necessary. "He's had a significant fall," Dr. Myers explained. "No broken bones, fortunately, but it's accelerated our timeline discussions. His care team believes he would benefit from moving to the skilled nursing wing sooner than we anticipated." "I see," Jessica said, absorbing this latest development. Have you discussed this with him? Yes, this morning. He's resistant. The doctor paused. He asked if you could come by. He values your perspective. After assuring Dr. Myers she would visit that afternoon, Jessica ended the call and sat quietly for a moment, gathering her thoughts. The irony of being Robert's trusted advisor still occasionally struck her, though the bitterness of their history had long since dissipated. She buzzed her assistant. "Claire, I need to clear my schedule after 2 o'clock. Family matter." 3 hours later, Jessica navigated the bright, airy corridors of lakeside living, a far cry from the institutional nursing homes of previous generations. Robert's monthly care costs would have been prohibitive on his own resources, but Michael had quietly arranged a supplemental payment plan when it became clear Robert's insurance and savings would fall short. "For the children's peace of mind," he'd explained when Jessica questioned the generosity toward her ex-husband, "and because it's the right thing to do." She found Robert in the facility's garden, seated in his wheelchair beside a koi pond. At 52, his once handsome features remained recognizable despite the mask-like expression that Parkinson's often imposed. His hands trembled constantly now, and his voice had diminished to a raspy whisper, but his mind remained sharp, a mixed blessing that left him fully aware of his body's betrayal. "Jessica," he acknowledged as she sat on the bench beside him, "always punctual." "Dr. Myers called," she replied, seeing no reason for preamble. "He mentioned the fall and the recommendation." Robert's laugh was brittle. "Recommendation? Such a polite word for you can no longer pretend to be independent." He gestured toward the pond with a shaking hand. "I was watching these fish. Some swim in circles all day. Others explore every corner. I wonder if they know they're in a manufactured environment, constrained by invisible boundaries." Jessica recognized the melancholy philosophical turn his thoughts often took now. "The skilled nursing wing isn't a prison, Robert. It's specialized care to help maintain your quality of life." "Quality," he repeated with a hollow smile. "I used to think that meant corner offices and luxury cars." His gaze shifted to her, surprisingly lucid. "You were right, you know," Robert continued, his trembling fingers gripping the armrest of his wheelchair. "About what matters. About building something real instead of chasing status and appearances." Jessica studied the man who had once been the center of her world, now diminished by illness yet somehow more authentic than he'd ever been during their marriage. "We all have different journeys, Robert, different lessons to learn. Some of us learn them too late." His gaze drifted back to the koi pond. "Do you ever wonder how things might have been different if I hadn't left?" The question hung between them, loaded with history and regret. Jessica considered it honestly, thinking of the salon empire she had built, the foundation helping single mothers, her marriage to Michael, the blended family they had created. "I used to," she admitted. "In the early days I tortured myself with what-ifs, but now I can't imagine any other path. Everything, the pain, the struggle, the uncertainty, it all led me where I needed to be." Robert nodded slowly. "You created something beautiful from the wreckage. I've always admired that about you, even when I couldn't say it. And you faced this disease with dignity," Jessica replied. "The children see that. It matters to them." "The children." Robert's expression softened. "Emma called yesterday. She's been accepted into that design program in Milan, following in her mother's creative footsteps." Pride warmed Jessica's chest. "She told me. She's worried about being away while you're—" She hesitated. "While I'm deteriorating," Robert finished bluntly. "Always the diplomat, Jessica, even now." He sighed, a raspy sound that seemed to come from deep within. "I told her to go." At 52, Jessica had transitioned much of the day-to-day business operations to her executive team, focusing instead on creative direction, mentor programs, and special events like today's. "Mom, you're going to turn her into a stylist before she's learned multiplication," Emma teased, approaching with her 3-year-old son balanced on her hip. At 28, Emma had become a successful designer, creating the distinctive interiors for each new Parker-style location while raising her 2 children with her architect husband. "There are worse legacies," Jessica replied with a smile. Besides, her fine motor skills are exceptional. Like her grandmother's, Michael added, joining the conversation as he returned from showing Ethan's twin boys the new virtual reality styling program in the technology lab. At 60, Michael had refined his silver fox appearance, his distinguished good looks making him the perfect brand ambassador for Parker Styles' recently launched men's grooming line. The academy hummed with activity, children exploring styling, stations, teenagers experimenting with temporary color products, families touring the museum-like display of Parker Styles' evolution from a single salon to a beauty empire with 67 locations across 3 continents. In the center of the main atrium hung an enlarged photograph that never failed to make Jessica pause. Herself at 30, standing before the original salon on opening day, Emma and Ethan on either side of her, baby Noah in her arms. Her hair was shorter then, her eyes simultaneously tired and determined, her smile tentative but genuine. It was the face of a woman standing at the threshold of possibility, not yet knowing how far her journey would take her. Ms. Parker Williams, a young student stylist approached, clipboard in hand. The documentary crew is ready for your interview whenever you're available. The Parker Legacy Project, a documentary chronicling Jessica's unorthodox entry into the beauty industry and the social impact of her subsequent success, had been filming for several months. Initially reluctant to participate, Jessica had eventually agreed when the producers framed it as an opportunity to inspire other women facing similar challenges. "Give me 10 minutes, Jessica requested. "I want to finish with my granddaughter." First, as the student departed, Jessica felt a familiar presence at her elbow. Samantha, now in her 80s but still elegant in her tailored pantsuit, leaned on her cane as she observed Lily's concentration. "She reminds me of you," Samantha remarked. "That same intensity when you focus on creating something." Jessica smiled at her oldest friend and mentor. "High praise coming from you." She glanced around the bustling academy. "Could you have imagined this when I was cutting hair in your conservatory?" "Every bit of it," Samantha replied without hesitation. "I recognized quality when I saw it, even when you couldn't see it in yourself." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched Lily's careful efforts with the mannequin. After a moment, Samantha spoke again, her voice softer. "I saw Robert last week. His nurse said it won't be much longer now." Jessica nodded, unsurprised by the news. Robert's condition had declined dramatically in recent months, his once fluid mind now frequently confused, his body increasingly unresponsive to medication. She visited weekly, sometimes sitting silently beside his bed when he was unable to communicate, other times listening to his fragmented memories when lucidity briefly returned. "Emma and Ethan are flying in this weekend," she said. "They want to say goodbye while he can still recognize them." "And Noah?" Samantha asked gently. "He's cutting his trip short, coming back from Tokyo tomorrow." Noah, at 24, had followed his sister into design, but with a focus on fashion rather than interiors. His apprenticeship with a renowned Japanese designer had been a dream opportunity, one that Robert had surprisingly helped to arrange through old business connections during a period of mental clarity. "You've created an extraordinary family," Samantha observed, "not just biological but chosen, connected by love rather than obligation." The truth of her words resonated through Jessica. Her family had expanded in ways she could never have predicted. Michael's relatives, Samantha, long-time employees who had become friends, even Eleanor, who had lived to 98 and had treasured Jessica's children and grandchildren as her own. "Grandma, look! I finished the whole head!" Lily's proud exclamation drew Jessica's attention back to her granddaughter, who had indeed completed a remarkably even sectioning job on the mannequin. "That's wonderful, Lily!" Jessica knelt beside the little girl, admiring her work. Nurse, this is exactly how I started learning too." "Really?" Lily's eyes widened. "Mommy said you cut your own hair first when you were sad." Jessica glanced at Emma, who shrugged apologetically. "She asked about the picture in your office, the one Diane took right after your bathroom haircut." "It's true," Jessica acknowledged, deciding that honesty was appropriate. "I was very sad, and cutting my hair helped me feel brave again." Lily considered this with the solemnity only children can bring to emotional matters. Like Rapunzel in reverse, she decided finally. She lost her magic when her hair was cut, but you found yours. The unexpected insight left Jessica momentarily speechless, from the mouths of babes indeed. That's exactly right, Lily. I found my magic when I cut my hair. Ms. Parker Williams? The student had returned. The crew is ready whenever you are. Jessica nodded, giving Lily's shoulder a gentle squeeze before standing. I'll be right there. As she walked toward the interview area, Jessica felt the weight of the journey she was about to recount. 25 years since those first desperate scissor cuts. 25 years of reinvention, growth, and healing. 25 years of transforming a moment of despair into a legacy of empowerment. The documentary interviewer, a thoughtful woman in her 30s, welcomed Jessica with professional warmth. Thank you for making time today, Ms. Parker Williams. We'd like to start with your reflections on the Parker Foundation's impact, particularly the scholarship program for single mothers seeking career training. The question centered Jessica immediately. The Foundation's work, funding education for women rebuilding their lives after divorce, domestic violence, or widowhood, represented the heart of what she had built. More meaningful than the business success, more enduring than the brand recognition was this tangible expression of turning personal pain into collective healing. The scholarships began from a simple recognition, Jessica replied, her voice steady with conviction, that the most difficult moments of our lives can become doorways to our greatest purpose if we're brave enough to step through them. As the interview progressed, Jessica found herself tracing the arc of her journey, from that first improvised haircut in Samantha's conservatory to the development of her signature styling techniques, from the original salon to the international expansion, from personal survival to philanthropic vision. You've often said that your success wasn't just about talent or opportunity, the interviewer noted. What do you consider the most important factor in your journey? Jessica considered the question, thinking of all the elements that had contributed to her unlikely rise. Michael's belief in her, Samantha's mentorship, her children's resilience, her own determination. But beneath all these was something more fundamental. The willingness to begin again, she said finally. To stand in the ruins of what was and imagine what could be. To take that first step when the entire path isn't visible. She smiled, remembering herself at 30, scissors in hand, heart racing with equal parts fear and possibility. Transformation isn't a single event. It's a continual process of becoming, of cutting away what no longer serves to make room for new growth. Later that evening, as the family day festivities wound down, Jessica found herself alone in her office at the academy. The space reflected her aesthetic sensibility, warm neutrals accented with touches of blue and gold, comfortable yet elegant, welcoming yet sophisticated. On her desk stood a small glass case containing the antique silver scissors Samantha had gifted her at the flagship salon opening, a tangible connection to generations of women who had used their hands to help others present their best selves to the world. A knock at the door interrupted her reflections. Michael entered, his expression gentle. The grandkids are all packed up. Emma and Dan are taking Lily and Jack back to their house, and Ethan's boys are staying with us tonight, while he and Melissa have dinner with friends. Perfect, Jessica nodded, gathering her things. Did Noah call with his arrival time? Landing at 11 tomorrow morning. I'll pick him up on my way to the hospital. Michael crossed to stand behind her chair, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. Are you all right? That was an intense interview today. Jessica leaned back against him, drawing strength from his steady presence as she had for 20 years. I'm fine, just reflective. Telling my story always feels like watching someone else's life unfold. The younger me seems simultaneously so familiar and so distant. She'd be proud of you, Michael suggested, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. That frightened, determined woman with the bathroom scissors. I hope so, Jessica agreed softly. I hope she'd feel her pain was honored by what grew from it. As they drove home through the gentle spring evening, Jessica watched the cityscape pass outside her window, the original salon where everything had begun, the park where she had pushed her children on swings during those early precarious days, the historic building that now housed the Parker-style flagship location. Each landmark represented a chapter in her story, a stepping stone on the path that had led her from abandoned wife to industry pioneer. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, the bittersweet task of supporting her children as they said goodbye to their father, the complex emotions of witnessing Robert's final decline. But Jessica would face it with the same strength and compassion that had carried her through every previous trial. The hands that had once trembled with grief as they cut away her past now moved with confident purpose, creating beauty and opportunity, not just for herself, but for countless others whose paths she had touched. In the quiet of the car, with Michael beside her and the future still unfolding before them, Jessica felt a profound sense of gratitude for that desperate moment 25 years ago, when loss had cracked her life open wide enough for new light to enter, when endings had created space for more beautiful beginnings, when the sharpness of scissors against hair had cut the first strand of a legacy still being woven. The autumn sun filtered through stained glass, casting jewel-toned patterns across the gathered mourners. Jessica sat in the front pew of the church, flanked by Emma and Ethan, with Noah beside them. Michael's solid presence behind her provided silent support as the minister spoke of life's seasons, of legacy, of the complex journey that had been Robert Parker's 55 years on Earth. Robert had passed peacefully 3 days earlier, with Jessica holding one hand and Emma the other. Ethan and Noah standing vigil nearby. His final moments of lucidity had been a gift, recognition in his eyes, coherent words of love for his children, and a quiet thank you to Jessica that encompassed more than language could express. The funeral service reflected Robert's complicated life, his professional achievements, his passionate hobbies, his failures and redemptions. Heather had flown in from California, sitting quietly in a back pew with appropriate solemnity, but no visible grief. Various business associates filled most of the remaining seats, along with staff from the care facility, who had grown fond of their philosophical patient. When the minister invited family members to speak, Emma rose first, her poise remarkable, as she shared memories of weekend fishing trips and bedtime stories from her early childhood, then more recent moments of connection, despite her father's illness. Ethan followed with anecdotes that revealed Robert's dry humor and unexpected wisdom. Noah spoke briefly but powerfully about chosen family and the blessing of knowing Robert, despite their lack of biological connection. Jessica had not planned to speak. Her relationship with Robert had evolved into something too complex, too private for public articulation. But as her children resumed their seats, she felt a gentle nudge from within, a recognition that her voice belonged in this moment to completing the circle of their shared history. She approached the pulpit slowly, the weight of decades of intertwined lives sitting on her shoulders like a familiar shawl. Looking out at the gathered faces, some known, many strange, she took a deep breath. Robert and I began our adult lives together, she started simply. We created 2 beautiful children, shared 13 years of marriage, and then parted ways in circumstances that were painful for everyone involved. Her gaze briefly met Heather's in the back pew, not with accusation, but with acknowledgement of their shared connection to the man being honored. What most people don't know, Jessica continued, is that years later, when illness reshaped Robert's life, our story took an unexpected turn. What began as pragmatic co-parenting evolved into something neither of us could have predicted, a friendship founded not on romantic love, but on shared history, mutual respect, and eventually forgiveness. She paused, gathering her thoughts. During his final years, Robert often spoke of second chances, not to rewrite the past, but to create meaning from it. He faced his diagnosis and decline with a courage that taught all of us about dignity and vulnerability. And in his own way, he became an important part of the extended family that life assembled around us, contributing to a tapestry far richer and more complex than the conventional picture we'd once imagined. Looking toward her children, she saw tears streaming down Emma's face, Ethan's jaw clenched against emotion, Noah's hand supportively gripping his brother's shoulder. Behind them sat Michael, his eyes reflecting love and pride. Perhaps that's Robert's most meaningful legacy, Jessica concluded softly. The reminder that our lives are not defined by our worst mistakes or our greatest successes, but by our willingness to keep growing, to seek redemption, to find grace in unexpected places. In the end, his journey came full circle, back to family, back to what matters most, and for that completion, we can all be grateful. The reception following the service was held at Jessica and Michael's home, a decision that might once have seemed unthinkable, but now felt entirely appropriate. As guests mingled in the spacious backyard, sharing memories and connections, Jessica found herself drawn to the quiet sanctuary of her kitchen, momentarily needing space to process the emotional weight of the day. She was arranging another tray of refreshments when Heather appeared in the doorway, hesitant and slightly uncomfortable. "This is very generous of you," Robert's second wife said after an awkward moment. "Hosting like this?" Jessica shrugged lightly. It seemed right. For the children, primarily. Heather nodded, fidgeting with her purse strap. "I wanted to thank you for what you did for Robert after I left. The children told me how often you visited, how you coordinated his care, made sure he wasn't alone." She paused. "You had every right to abandon him the way he abandoned you, the way I abandoned him." "That wouldn't have served anyone," Jessica replied simply. "Especially not Emma and Ethan." "Still," Heather persisted, "it was remarkable. Most people wouldn't have found that kind of compassion." Jessica considered the woman before her, still beautiful but somehow diminished, as if life had gradually deflated the confident presence she had once projected. Time had altered both their perspectives, softened the rigid roles of wife and the other woman into something more human, more nuanced. "I learned something important along the way," Jessica said finally. "Holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. At some point, you have to set it down, not for them, but for yourself." Heather's eyes glistened with unexpected tears. "I never found that wisdom. I'm still carrying too many regrets." "It's never too late to begin again," Jessica offered gently. "That's another lesson life has taught me." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Emma, who entered carrying Lily on her hip. "Mom, Lily wants to show you her drawing." "From art class, it's a portrait of the family." As Heather excused herself, Emma gave her mother a questioning look. "Everything okay?" "Just finding closure," Jessica assured her, turning her attention to her granddaughter. "Now let me see this masterpiece." Lily proudly presented a colorful drawing filled with stick figures of varying heights, each labeled in wobbly child's handwriting. Jessica, Michael, Emma, Dan, Ethan, Melissa, Noah, the grandchildren. A traditional family tree this was not, but rather a joyful constellation of connected souls. "And who's this?" Jessica asked, pointing to a figure drawn slightly apart from the others, surrounded by what appeared to be clouds. "That's Grandpa Robert in heaven," Lily explained matter-of-factly. "Mommy said he went to live in the sky. Now, but he's still part of our family story." Jessica met Emma's eyes over Lily's head, moved by the simple truth in her granddaughter's explanation. "That's exactly right, Lily. Still part of our family story." As the day progressed and guests gradually departed, Jessica found moments to connect with each person who had played a significant role in her journey. Samantha, now using a wheelchair but still sharp as ever, holding court among admirers. Eleanor's daughter, who had continued her mother's tradition of friendship with the Parker Williams family. The original stylists from the first salon, many, now managing their own Parker-style locations. Each conversation a thread in the tapestry of her life, each relationship a testament to the family she had built beyond biological boundaries. When the last guest had gone and the house quieted, Jessica slipped away to the back porch, her thinking place, her sanctuary. The autumn evening was cool but pleasant, the garden preparing for winter's rest, yet still showing the last blooms of the season. She sat on the porch swing that had witnessed so many pivotal conversations over the years, allowing herself to fully feel the complex emotions of the day. Michael found her there as twilight deepened the shadows, settling beside her in the practiced rhythm of a couple who had shared thousands of such moments. No words were needed as he draped a light blanket over their laps and took her hand in, his thumb tracing familiar patterns across her palm. I was thinking about ripples, Jessica said after a comfortable silence. How one event, even a painful one, can set in motion waves that touch shores we never imagined. Michael nodded, understanding as he always did. Robert's leaving. Yes. She leaned her head against his shoulder. If he hadn't left, I wouldn't have cut my hair in desperation, wouldn't have discovered my talent, wouldn't have met Samantha, or you, wouldn't have built Parker Style or the foundation, wouldn't be sitting here now in this life that I love so completely. From devastation to creation, Michael mused. It's the story of your life, Jessica. The story you've helped countless other women write for themselves through the foundation's work. The observation settled over Jessica like a blessing, capturing the essence of her journey in a few simple words. From devastation to creation, from abandonment to empowerment, from a broken heart to a legacy of healing. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Jessica thought of all the women who had sat in her styling chair over the years, wounded by loss, transformed by attention, emerging with renewed confidence to face their own next chapters. She thought of the scholarship recipients finding new purpose through education and training. She thought of her children and grandchildren carrying forward the values of resilience and reinvention she had modeled for them. "Do you know what tomorrow is?" she asked softly. Michael considered for a moment. "The 25th anniversary of your first professional haircut, Samantha in the conservatory." Jessica smiled, still amazed by his memory for the milestones that mattered to her. 25 years since I stood at a crossroads and chose to see possibility instead of only loss. "A choice you've made again and again," Michael noted, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And taught others to make as well." In the gentle sway of the porch swing, with night settling around them like a comfortable embrace, Jessica felt a profound sense of completion. Not an ending. There were still chapters to be written, still growth to experience, still love to give and receive. But a moment of recognition that the circle had closed, that meaning had been made from what once seemed meaningless, that beauty had indeed risen from ashes. The frightened woman who had stood before a bathroom mirror, scissors in hand and tears on her cheeks, could never have imagined the future she was cutting her way toward, could never have foreseen that her moment of greatest pain would become the foundation of her greatest purpose, could never have known that 25 years later she would look back on that desperate act as the first step toward a life more fulfilled, more authentic, and more impactful than the one that had been taken from her. From a single strand, a tapestry had grown. From a broken heart, a larger love had emerged. From an ending forced upon her, a beginning she had claimed as her own had flourished. This was Jessica Parker's legacy. Not just a business empire or a charitable foundation, but a living testament to the transformative power of resilience, the healing potential of creative expression, and the human capacity to build beauty from brokenness. As night deepened around them and distant stars traced ancient patterns overhead, Jessica and Michael continued their gentle swaying, two lives interwoven by choice rather than chance, creating together the next chapter of a story. Still unfolding, still growing, still transforming, still becoming.